All right, looks like we are live. Welcome to Standing for Truth. I am your host, Donnie, and I want to thank you all for being here for tonight's epic debate, the Great God Debate. Is there reasonable evidence for God? We've got two seasoned debaters here. Mark, I appreciate your coffee. I got one too. Cheers.
Yeah.
Um, it's going to be a lot of fun. Like I said, two seasoned debaters, TRock, Mark Reid. Mark Reid or TRock's in the affirmative for tonight in terms of is there reasonable evidence for God? And both these debaters will be back here as well for a couple more epic debates. So, Mark, you're going to be here in July debating Kent Hovind, evolution debate. And TRock, you're going to be here debating James W. James W. was just here a couple days ago debating dinosaurs and man. So if you have not yet seen that one was a ton of fun. So please check it out. Okay, that being said, Mark, TRock, I want to thank you both for giving us your time for this fun debate. And before we get into the fun, though, as I typically like to do, let's kind of break the ice, get to know you guys a little bit. And why don't we start with Mark? Mark, how you doing this morning? And a little bit about
yourself. Good. I wouldn't call myself a seasoned debater. I'm lightly salted, I think is more apt. My name's Mark Reid. I'm a network engineering student. I'm basically work with computer systems and things like that. I love to debate. I love theology. I love morality debates. And I really enjoy coming on. And I do want to thank Donnie for inviting me on. And it's very good to meet TRock for the first time. And hopefully we can have some really good conversations on where we're coming from. And thank you for joining us. Thank you for tuning in. And that's basically what I'm doing here. I just like to have conversations with people. And I'm sure it'll be great tonight.
Mark, you're always cordial. You're always sophisticated. So I'm always excited to have you on. You are the lightly salted debater. I appreciate that. So
absolutely. Yeah.
Your relevant links are in the description box. That is, some previous debates you've had on this channel, for example. So people can check that out. And same with you, TRock. We got your relevant links in the description box. How you doing? How you been? A little bit about yourself.
Doing well. Nice to be back. Thank you, Donnie, for hosting us and moderating. Thank you, Mark, for joining in the discussion. A big thank you to the audience. I appreciate it when folks tune in and take a sincere interest in this. I've been pretty busy, but I'll definitely take time out of my schedule to have these kinds of conversations. So glad to be here.
TRock, thank you so much. I do understand these debates, they take time and work and energy. So that's why, again, I do want to thank you both for doing this. Much appreciated. Okay, well, for the audience sake, I'm going to go over the format. So it's going to be, formal, but kind of semi-formal because we're going to be having a free-flowing dialogue. We'll be starting off with, 12-minute opening statements. TRock being the affirmative, he will start us off there. Then we're going to have uninterrupted 8-minute rebuttals, followed by the 30-minute discussion. We'll keep it free-flowing and organic and maintaining, equal time as much as possible. Then we're going to have a 5-minute closing statement. And then, as always, this is where we get you guys in the audience involved. We're going to have an audience Q&A about 25, 30 minutes. So just make sure you're tagging me with your questions at Standing for Truth, and that way I won't miss them, and we'll try and do our best to keep them on topic. The debate tonight, is there reasonable evidence for God? So, TRock, we're going to hand it over to you. My good man, 12 minutes. I can give you both a 1-minute warning when we hit the 11-minute mark. That way you'll know to kind of start winding things down a little bit.
All right, I'm gonna set me a timer real quick. Okay, Donnie, I'm gonna share my screen here if I can. Let's see, I'm doing here. And we're good to go. Okay. Let's start, buddy. All right. My personal pet peeve, thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. It's my new mantra here. If evolutionists use sound logic, they would be creationists. Okay, the topic of tonight's debate, is there good evidence for God? Donnie, am I coming in good, sound and everything?
Yes, coming good. It's coming in good. Your slides are up. Good to go.
Okay, good. Okay, so there are three necessary truths that stem from an omnipotent God, specifically the God of the Bible. But this would be the case no matter what. It's just logical truths. So most listeners on the theological aspect of Christianity are familiar with the idea of Trinity, and even more so. There's a popular idea of identifying a variety of trinities in the world that we live in. So I've identified another trinity that I personally have not seen. If somebody else out there has done this, then I would love to hear about it, but I personally have not come across it. I put this together, this particular trinity, to demonstrate that the God of the Bible does have evidence, is real, and is the only logical option. So number one, omnipotent God necessitates that from him stems sound, internally consistent philosophy. He's scientifically accurate, and he's historically accurate. If you don't have any one of those, you don't have the omnipotent God. And as we progress through this presentation, we're going to see, I'm not heavily focusing on the opposing view, but I am pointing out that it does not fit this criteria at all. Okay, so the earmarks of proper philosophy are that it is internally consistent. It does not contradict itself. It declares that truth exists a priori, that we can know the truth. It provides the foundation and the framework for how we think about both science and history, and it has an absolute standard. The earmarks of proper philosophy with biblical examples. Thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. That's foundational to the entire theme of the Bible. No lies of the truth. That comes from the New Testament. And you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free, because truth does exist, and we can know it. And so how do we apply that? Jesus said, do men gather grapes of thorns or figs of thistles? And then he takes another step and says, the disciple is not above his master, nor the servant above his Lord. I'm going to back up a minute and show what we're establishing here is the absolute standard. The master or the Lord is the absolute standard. And in our case, that is the Godhead. Earmarks of improper philosophy. It's internally inconsistent. It does contradict itself. Truth may exist, but there tends to be a lack of confidence in this idea. We can possibly know the truth, but we may not. It destroys the foundation and the framework for how we think about science and history, and it is subject to current opinion. In other words, it has no absolute standard. It's whatever the current opinion is the standard. So the common modern examples of improper philosophy, there is no truth. Now, not everybody that professes to be an evolutionist or an atheist goes down this path, but it is a product of atheism. There is no truth. Follow your heart. The Bible says the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it? People who follow their heart, this is another what I call self-defeating philosophy. Science is self-correcting. This is a common claim from evolutionists that like to point out that, oh, we may have got it wrong in the past, but we discover new evidences and science corrects itself. But the problem is history doesn't change. So essentially what they're admitting is they're perpetually wrong. Morality and sense of right and wrong change from one generation to the next. This is self-defeating. Whatever you think you're doing right today, somebody else tomorrow is going to come along and say, no, you were wrong, I'm right. And they're going to basically write you off and start something else. So, and that can go on hypothetically, perpetually. Everybody's wrong except the current generation. Earmarks of proper science. So in the theme of evidence for God, so the Bible is not a science book. Nevertheless, it does touch on a number of scientific ideas, and it is accurate in all points that it touches on. when it comes to science. So he says, it is he that sitteth upon the circle of the earth, and the inhabitants thereof are as grasshoppers, that stretcheth out the heavens as a curtain, and spreadeth them out as a tent to dwell in. Of course, this is Isaiah, and I believe it's somewhere on the order of about 2,400 years old. So well precedes modern ideas of a global earth, round earth, if you will. He stretcheth out the north over the empty place, and hangeth the earth upon nothing. That's Job. That's even older than Isaiah by my estimation, by at least a few hundred years, probably. Well ahead of his time. Compare that to other religions that have a giant turtle on the back of a giant elephant and all kinds of bizarre ideas, because they simply are not, do not emanate from the God of the Bible, the omnipotent, all-knowing God that created the heavens and the earth, so they couldn't possibly know. Big Bang has the same problem. They imagine a solution that nobody can ever see, and it is scientifically internally inconsistent. So the Bible begins in a time when people could not see the earth from afar like we can today. And because it is the omnipotent God who created the earth, it's very easy for people like Job to know that the earth was hung upon nothing. Or who shut up the sea with doors when it brake forth as if it had issued out of the womb. That kind of, it goes along with the very next one. Hast thou entered into the springs of the sea, or hast thou walked in the search of the depth? It wasn't until the early 1900s, from my understanding, that people finally discovered that there are freshwater springs coming out of the bottom of the ocean. Now, was Job a scuba diver? I seriously doubt it. But when you go back and read Job chapter 38, you find out that this is actually God speaking to Job. And so God is giving information that Job could not have known on his own. More biblical examples. Where is the way? Where light dwelleth. And as for darkness, where is the place thereof? Light has a way, and darkness has a place. And he says that thou shouldest take it to the bound thereof, and that thou shouldest know the paths to the house thereof. In other words, this is still Job chapter 38. This is God speaking things that Job cannot know, and basically saying, hey, Job, how big is outer space? Job has no way of knowing that. By what way is the light parted, which scattereth the east wind upon the earth? This kind of highlights the idea that, Christians typically get accused of, some kind of magic coming from the sky. But here, again, this is God speaking to Job, and he's telling him very plainly what the mechanism that causes the weather patterns is. He says, canst thou bind the sweet influences of Pleiades, or loose the bands of Orion? Canst thou bring forth Mazzaroth in his season, or canst thou guide Arcturus with his sons? Now he's talking about a particular star formation. The bands of Orion are three particularly bright stars, and Pleiades in particular is interesting here, because this is, again, God speaking to Job, and he's saying, can you bind the sweet influence of Pleiades? Well, Pleiades is what's known as a heliacal star, meaning it moves in a weird pattern. That word implies to me that it moves in kind of a helical form, like you think of screw threads on a bolt. But anyway, it has a strange pattern, and historically it was actually used to determine annual cycles and seasons. So here's God speaking well beyond the knowledge of the day. And then he says, who hath put wisdom in the inward parts, or who hath given understanding to the heart? Well, in the secular view, they don't know where knowledge, they don't know where wisdom, they don't know where love, where empathy, where those kinds of, they don't know where logic comes from. It's not an innate property of matter. And so God is telling Job, hey, somebody had to have done it. It's not a property of nature. Earmarks of improper science. So here's some past examples, and I get it that not all evolutionists or atheists fall for these things or believe these things anymore, but they are conclusions that have drawn out of improper science, the so-called self-correcting science. Once upon a time, the academics said the world is made of four elements: earth, wind, water, fire. What does the Bible say? It says that the things that are visible are made of things that cannot be seen. And it said that thousands of years before the more recent academics made this declaration about earth, wind, water, and fire. Dinosaurs evolved before grass. Turns out it was a bad guess on the part of improper science. Vestigial organs in the human body, there are none. Junk DNA, there is none. 98% similarity between human and chimp DNA has also been thoroughly falsified, even by the secularists. It looks a lot more like 80-85%, something like that. And bad methodology, deep time extrapolation for origins in the secular view, but they use only very short-term extrapolation for technological applications. If somebody wants to argue that point, we can get into that. But
1 minute.
There are actually two different methods in modern science. One that applies to origins, because you can do that when there are no consequences for bad guesses, and a different method, interpolation, for technology, because there are consequences. So there is not one science method as is commonly touted. Accurate biblical history, another strong evidence. King David and Daniel both, I'm going to have to summarize quick, but King David and Daniel both were thought for a long time to be fictional heroes of the Bible, until more recent archaeological discoveries have shown that they are indeed historical figures from an extant point of view, not just a biblical point of view. City of Jericho, same thing. They imagined that the whole story was made up until some late coming discoveries figured out that, Joshua, his description of the city, the events that he tells of, are complete and accurate history. And with that, I will hand my time over.
Appreciate it, TRock. If that's your timer, that's a good way to get me pumped. Got a coffee here and some good music. So, all right. Well, thank you so much, TRock. 12 minutes flies by, and let's now hand it over to Mark Reid. Mark, whenever you're ready. I understand you want to share your screen too. We can get.
Yep. Give me 1 sec. Thank you so much. There we go. And I'll just get a little organized here. Excellent. Thank you so much. Good to be here. I hope we can have a really good conversation about this topic, which is good evidence for God. I've already introduced myself, so hopefully you'll know a bit more about me. And today we're talking about evidence. So I thought I'm sort of going to go for sort of what is evidence and how we collect evidence. And I think that's really important, because it's not only the conclusions that you make, but it's how you gather the evidence that is important, and what constitutes strong and weak evidence. So evidence ties facts to conclusions. But we can get very wrong conclusions from the same facts. For instance, the facts that we see a long way to the apparent horizon could and is argued by some to be evidence of a flat Earth. But is that good evidence? No, it's not. So how we collect that evidence is really important. This is called methodology. And methodology is the way we gather evidence and how it comes in. The entire system of methods is called the methodology. And I want to discuss with TRock what his methodologies are, whether they're consistent, and whether it fits the categories that I'm going to outline. So I'm going to go through these properties of good evidence gathering, or good methods, if you will. So replicability. Basically, someone does something over and over and gets the same result every single time. For instance, Galileo rolling balls down an incline demonstrated gravity would come to the same speed no matter what the size of the ball. It has a constant rate. This happened every time it's done. And it's important that when we do evaluate evidence, we do get the same result every single time, or at least, a significant portion of the time. Robustness. This is a scientific term. It means that the method for gathering evidence must return consistent results, even if it's you or I do it. If we've got that Galileo experiment that I mentioned earlier, if I roll the balls and something different happens, that experiment and how that method is being used is not robust. It isn't going. It doesn't work for two people the same. There's a clicking in the background there. I'm not sure what that is. Just 1 second.
Oh, no worries, Mark. It looks like TRock. Okay. TRock's muted. You're good to go.
All right, cheers. Thank you. So rigor, this again is another scientific term. That's the method. We have to take every possible explanation into account. If you're eliminating possibilities without good reason, your method of gathering evidence is not rigorous. It is a flawed way to do it. For instance, if you find a body with a gun, you might say, hey, a murder happened. But wait, that could be evidence of suicide. It could be evidence of accidental death. If you're ruling those out with no good reason, your method is not strong. It is a weak method of gathering evidence. So basically, you've got to consider everything, not just the first initial reaction. Objectivity. The method must approach the proposition without any bias or presupposition of the outcome. Objectivity is designed to reduce bias. When we approach a subject, we can fall prey to confirmation bias, that we interpret things how we want to see them and not how they actually are. This is a huge problem and is all throughout scientific method, and we know it occurs. So what we try to do is reduce bias by keeping an objective standard, one that is completely neutral and does not wish for anything to be true, just takes the facts as they are, uses a strong method to evaluate those facts into a conclusion. And consistency. Basically, the method has to be applied to all possible explanations consistently. So basically, if I'm applying a Nigerian prince and I'm saying, hey, I wouldn't believe that because that's a suspect, and then a Kenyan prince contacts me, you have to use the method in the same way. You can't be biased and use one method differently to another. It has to be consistent across the board. Now, the scientific methods, and I'm going to go through these because this is an example of an incredibly strong method in which to gather evidence. Testable predictions. So this is one reason why it's so strong. Now, look, I'm not saying the scientific methods are the only way to gather evidence. Like if you're crossing the street, you might look both ways. You might listen for traffic. You don't submit it for peer review. I'm not saying that this is the only way. But if you are to propose that something is true, you really should be using a method to find that truth at least as strong as it needs. And I'll go into sort of what my benchmark of that is later. The scientific method is incredibly strong. It is responsible for just about everything we see these days, all the technology, all the medicine, just about everything. But it's not the only way to gather evidence. And I'm just acknowledging that, just so I'm not going to say, hey, scientific method is the only way, but you need to have a strong method all the same. So testable predictions. We make predictions like, for instance, we can predict the existence of Neptune from discrepancies in the data from Uranus. There's a lot of predictions that science have made that has come true in the past. And that's one way we know that it is a strong method. Peer review. So this is where we basically send it away to be used by others. Replication studies are done. The experiments are performed by other people. That's to help with the robustness. It's designed to eliminate bias because you're putting it through multiple people. We try to reduce the bias that's influencing what it is that we're testing. As I mentioned earlier, science produces results. Now, I'm talking everything from airplane flight to medicine to the internet that we're currently talking on, the computer systems that we're currently using, my phone, just about every single modern appliance around your house, in your house, and probably the way that your house was designed from an engineering standpoint is due to the scientific method. There seems to be no better way to arrive at the truth than the scientific method. And if TRock has one, I'd love to hear that methodology and why it's so strong in comparison to the scientific methods that are performed. So falsification, this is another reason the scientific method is so strong. What we do is we propose a hypothesis and then we try to prove that hypothesis wrong. And the reason why we do that is because it reduces bias. Because when you put forward something that you wish to find, trying to prove it wrong makes it so you're eliminating the bias of leaning towards it being right, wishing it were true and coming up with those results. And that's why falsification is performed. So now I'm going to go through a few types of weak types of evidence, ones that have not been collected very well, or we know are unreliable and do not fit the criteria that I've just been through. The first one is personal anecdotes. Everything from aliens to Bigfoot to flat Earth to every single crazy thing you could ever think of has been purported from personal anecdotes. Eyewitnesses reports fall into this. Eyewitness reports police know are very unreliable, and they're not that reliable in court. It entirely relies on the person giving that report. That's why DNA evidence and other types of physical evidence are way stronger, like fingerprints are way stronger than eyewitness reports. And of course, that's depending on the person giving it. Argumentation. Now, arguments by themselves are not evidence of anything. The soundness of the argument must be demonstrated. So what that means is that, you can say, if you want to show a logical conclusion, you've got to give the evidence backing up the way you got to it. For instance, okay, so all men are mortal, right? That's the start of your syllogism. Socrates is a man, Socrates is mortal. Now that's a valid syllogism. But what happens if Socrates is a cat? You've got to show that Socrates is immortal before the argument is worth anything. So just arguments by themselves are not evidence of anything. They're just logical thoughts that if the premises are true, the conclusion must be accepted. But the evidence is what shows that the premises are in fact true. Socrates is a man and not a cat. Evidence against the alternative. This is one where basically you argue that because something is wrong, another thing is right. Now that's fine when you've got a dichotomy, only two options. But the problem comes when it's a false dichotomy. There's more options available. Like you may argue, hey, we don't think that the Egyptians could have built the pyramids by themselves. Okay, but that's ruling out, but that doesn't mean you get to say, hey, it was aliens. It could be that the Egyptians were helped by another country. It could be that that something else could have happened there. You can't just assume because you eliminate one conclusion that another one is true. You've got to present evidence for the thing that you are saying is true, not evidence against something else. And that's a really big one. And one last thing. What's the strength of the evidence needed? Well, the strength of the evidence is proportional to the significance of the claim. And a lot of people quote Sagan, which says extraordinary evidence, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And that's kind of what I'm getting at. But I wouldn't go as far as sort of saying extraordinary evidence. I think that an extraordinary claim would just require very, very strong, unambiguous evidence. That if and I'll put this into terms, if you say, hey, you bought a cat and their name is Socrates, I would say, okay, cool, that's fine. Your word is all that I'll need to believe that's fine. Cat, Socrates, people have cats. If you say you have a crocodile called Socrates, I might go, hey, no, I don't, come on, show me a picture, pictures or you're lying. And that may be enough. I might go, wow, that's really weird, but that may be enough. If you say you have a dragon called Socrates, well, now even a picture is like, well, I'm not sure I believe that either. The claim is getting significantly higher and needs a better, burden of proof to support. So when you're talking about a God, you need very strong evidence. And I'll just add that a heap of weak evidence does not add up to strong evidence. It needs to be strong independently. That's all I have. Thank you for listening to me. And I look forward to talking with TRock.
All right, Mark, thank you so much for that opening statement. 12 minutes from the both of you. Very much appreciate the visuals, clear and concise. So great work to the both of you, TRock and Mark. Okay, we're moving into 8-minute uninterrupted rebuttals. TRock, whenever you're ready, we're going to hand you the mic. The floor is going to be yours. Before I do, I want to thank everybody in the chat for the questions that are already coming in, as well as the super chats and super stickers. So, okay, TRock, whenever you're ready, we will give you the floor for 8 minutes.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen again, Donnie.
You're all good.
Let me put this on full view. Okay, I'm kind of going back to where I left off for a minute before I get directly into the rebuttal itself. One of the things I want to point out here, because it's relevant to Mark's presentation, is there is a huge misconception that just gets perpetuated endlessly among the skeptics, and they actually believe each other. It's kind of ironic to me that people who put their trust in knowledge and science and stuff like that don't actually read the script that they argue against. And so that idea is what exactly is faith, and what that's relevant to is evidence. So we're going to look at the biblical definition of faith. Does the Bible lead us to think that we should believe anything without evidence? Indeed not. Else, why are there so many miracles throughout the Bible? God confirms himself to his people through miracles. Miracles are evidence. The word evidence is similar to the root evident. It is evident that something is going on. And so God literally displays his power above human ability in front of multiple eyewitnesses so that it cannot be refuted. And why does God continually say that ye may know? He wants his people to know. And every time he says that, there is an outward, obvious sign or action that happens that informs people that they actually do know that God's word is true. And why are so many prophecies given as signs for the people? And why is a test given to identify false prophets? And why did Jesus give 5 outward signs that would follow them that believe? And why did the apostles perform miracles themselves when establishing the early church? Biblical faith, in secular thought, faith is a belief in the absence of evidence, but this is clearly a straw man, as it is in direct contradiction to the biblical definition of faith. And the Bible says in Hebrews 11:1, now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Now, if you go back and read that again, it is literally saying that faith is evidence. Now, some of you are probably hung up on this thing about not seen, but not seen by whom? The bottom line is somebody did see it. It may not be me, it may not be you, but somebody did see it so that they could report it. And we will discover the internal inconsistency with atheism in this regard, because in atheism, there are no witnesses. So literally, nobody saw anything. Even so, faith, if it hath not works, is dead, being alone. Things only have substance. Only have substance if they are tangible to the senses, confirming that faith is evidence. Okay, so I've got a thing. We'll get into this, I suppose, in the open discussion on Bible prophecy. But I'm going to go back now and take a look at some of what Mark said, so that I can actually rebut some of his points. Now, oddly, we do agree on a lot of this, not all of it, but we do agree on a lot of it. The problem is here that what Mark is describing in terms of methodology is great for the here and now. It absolutely does not work in Origins. And so Origins itself is a really strong evidence for God, because there is no replicable history of Big Bang, first life, star formation, inflation, cosmic inflation, that kind of thing, planetary formation. There is nothing replicable about that. There are no robust models. There is no rigor in it. It is not objective. There are multiple theories about how these things happen, and I'm using the word theory in the common street sense. Multiple ideas or what's the word I'm looking for? Hypotheses on how some of these things happen, because it is not objective and it's not consistent. It's not testable. There is nothing about origins that is testable in modern science. He brought up peer review. Now, as a creationist, I think peer review is a really good thing. The problem is that the peer reviewers are not objective. They a priori reject ideas and methods that they don't agree with. He says there's no better methodology than the scientific method. Well, I would halfway agree with that if we're talking about developing modern technology, medicine, that sort of thing. The scientific method in the here and now sense is very strong. It was creationists that came up with this idea in the first place. But methodology, that type of scientific methodology is not applicable to anything in the past, in terms of past history. What you need in place of the scientific method for past history is eyewitness account. In the absence of eyewitness account, you're free to tell as many stories as you want, and you can be as wrong as you want to be as often as you want to be, and there's no consequence for it. Mark brought up the weak evidences as personal anecdote, but what does the Bible say about that very thing? The Bible says that it says, in the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, let every word be established. So the history, the existence of God, the testimonies about God, they are not one person's anecdotal story. There are multiple eyewitnesses for virtually every step of the way through the Bible, because it is actually disallowed in proper theology to not have eyewitnesses. It's disallowed to only have. It's not that it's disallowed to only have one witness, but per the law written in the Old Testament, in the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, let every word be established. In other words, you're probably not going to convict somebody of some heinous crime and give them the death penalty based on a single person eyewitness account. It's probably, in biblical terms, it does take more than one person. And in the modern sense, the more eyewitnesses you have, the stronger your case is. Fingerprints, other forensic sciences notwithstanding, multiple eyewitnesses is a very strong evidence in a court of law. Pardon, my phone won't silence. Okay.
You've got 1 minute, TRock.
Okay. He says argumentations are not evidence. I don't totally disagree with that. He did allude to needing some sense of soundness. I would agree with that. Not a whole lot there. He says, what strength of evidence is needed? Whenever we're talking about evidence for God, the evidence is very strong. So I'm sure he does not agree to that. But then the whole idea of proof is a very subjective idea. Proving something to me is different than proving something to you. But the strength of creation is, or the strength of the God of the Bible is that it covers all 3 necessary platforms, as discussed before. Logic and philosophy is internally consistent. The science, the application of the scientific method and the scientific knowledge that's portrayed in the Bible is consistent and accurate, and the history is accurate. And so the strength of evidence for a creator is that you cannot have the world that we have without one. So I will end there.
Okay, TRock, thank you so much for that 8-minute rebuttal. Time is flying by. Mark Reid, we're going to hand it over to you whenever you're ready. You got 8 minutes.
Fantastic. Thank you, Donnie. Okay, so just to jump straight into evolution, sound logic. Yes, evolutionists use sound logic. We use a scientific method. It is sound logic. It's been backed up. It's internally consistent. There's nothing inconsistent about evolution. So that's you say that internally consistent philosophy, that's basically validity. So if it's internally consistent, but you're equating that with soundness, which soundness means that the premises are actually true. So an internally consistent philosophy doesn't actually prove anything. It just means that it's valid in structure. And then you mentioned the Trinity, which I don't find as coherent. So when you look at the Trinity, you basically say, hey, it is 3 and 1. And of course, the logical, rational philosopher will go, is it 3 or is it 1? And they say, yes. That is not, that's the law of excluded middle is violated right there. It can't be, it's either 3 or it's 1. It can't be 3 and 1. It's just, I don't find that to be a very coherent argument. Scientifically accurate Bible. Now, this is kind of something that you touched on a lot, and there was rising from the dead is not scientifically accurate. Saints rising from the grave and parading around Jerusalem is not scientifically accurate. It's not even historically accurate. We have no historical records for these saints marching around Jerusalem like an undead horde. And you went on to say, like, the understanding of the heart. Now, this is I'm really sorry, but the heart is not the thing that, like, when you say written on your heart isn't a notepad. That's not scientifically accurate. The heart pumps blood around the body. Now, because in the past, and these people, they felt stuff in their heart, because when you get agitated, when things start to get on you, it pumps adrenaline, which speeds your heart up. You feel it in your heart, but that's not where it's coming from. It is the brain that is responsible for everything you said. Logic comes from the brain. Love comes from the brain. It's all the brain. The heart is a pump. That's it. That is scientifically accurate. Just because the Bible says that, hey, things are written on your heart, you feel it in your heart, and all these things about your heart, doesn't make it scientifically accurate. Now, for historical accuracy, you're basically saying, oh, because these people existed, because this city existed, then all of the claims in the Bible are true. No. We know Jerusalem existed, Jericho existed. I'm not arguing that. I'm not even a mythicist. I don't even claim that Jesus didn't exist. He may very well have been a real person. What we want to do is address each claim as it stands. So we don't just say, hey, because Jesus lived, he did all of the supernatural things attributed to him. That is a jump that I just cannot make. Because Jericho existed, then all the claims about God in the Bible are true. No, that is not the way to think about that. That's like saying because Sparta existed, then Hercules roamed the earth and killed the Hydra and battled these supernatural. No, that's not how we evaluate history, and that is not how historians work. Just because you have something mentioned in a book doesn't make all the claims of the book true. You need evidence for those claims, not just that a city existed. And some of the things that you ran through, we can know the truth. Can we? Every single truth? I'm not convinced of that. It's a very big universe. It may very well be the case that we can know every truth in the universe. I don't think I'm going to be alive when that happens, because it is a very big universe. Do you think you can know every truth? Do you think you can know the truth out in another galaxy, for instance? I don't think you can. I think there's some things that are just beyond us. And whether or not I do want to know every truth, but what I want has no bearing on what actually is or can be met by myself. I would like it if a God exists. I just don't think that it exists at all. You pointed to Bible quotations that touched on these truths, and you could do that for any book, the Quran and the Bhagavad Gita, the Hindu text. You could do that for any religious book. The point is that you're not consistent. You do not apply the same standard to other books that you do the Bible. Muhammad probably existed, but you do not automatically assume those supernatural claims are true. And why not if you're being consistent in your standard? Because you're not being consistent and you're being biased towards the book that you presuppose is already true. All of this seemed to be a lot of bias and wishful thinking. The idea that morality, it changes. Yeah, morality, the distribution of moral structures may mean that morality is subjective. But what I would want an objective morality, but that what I want has no bearing on whether or not it's true. You seem to be sort of saying these things, that this is what I want, and it'd be nice if this and this is, yeah, it'd be great. But I'm interested in the truth, not what I want. It doesn't matter what I want. There's circle of the earth thing, and this goes back to the scientific accuracy. It doesn't say that the earth is an oblate spheroid. It says that it's a circle, a two-dimensional representation, flat earth. Now, they may have meant a sphere. They may have meant a flat plane, a circle. We don't know, because you're taking hyperbolic language and reading out of it what you want to. It's called confirmation bias. It's because when you say, "Hey, the Earth is a circle," my counter, no, it's not. It's a spheroid, not a circle. This springs from the deep. Primitive people see water; they assume it comes from springs. It's not in any way indicative of, hey, they knew there were vents that had fresh water going into the ocean. That again is confirmation bias. That darkness means outer space. Does it? I mean, if you're in outer space and the sun's there, it's black, but it's not dark. You still have light, and even more light than you'd find on Earth. To say, hey, darkness automatically means outer space is reading a whole heap into there that it doesn't say. Same for the bands of Orion. They're talking poetically about things we know are stars. They're stars. I don't understand how that gets you to scientific accuracy. That science has made mistakes in the past. Yeah, absolutely. I wouldn't say otherwise. But that's a genetic fallacy. It's basically saying, hey, because it was this thing in the past, then it must be the same now. And science is self-correcting. It has corrected those mistakes. Religion didn't come along and correct the mistakes that science made. Science did. There are vestigial organs. This was done in Kitzbühel-Mercer's Dover with bacterial flagellum. Junk DNA, there is unused DNA in the human body. There is a 98 to 95% similarity between chimp and human DNA. So I'm not sure why you would point this out as mistakes science made. And again, just because there's a city in the Bible doesn't mean that supernatural things happened. I'm sorry, it just doesn't. And that's me.
Okay, Mark, that concludes your 8 minutes uninterrupted rebuttal. Thank you. Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for, actually, let me restart this clock. Okay, thank you, gentlemen, for the opening statements and the rebuttals. Great debate so far. We're now moving into everybody's favorite part of a debate, the open discussion. Guys, we'll keep this free-flowing and organic, asking each other questions pertaining to the topic of the debate. Is there good evidence for the existence of God? Mark, you just ended with your rebuttal. So, sure. TRock, why don't we hand it to you for either, the first question, first response, however you'd like to proceed. Go ahead, gentlemen. Just make sure you unmute TRock, and we're good to go.
Okay, where to start? I kind of geared most of my presentation towards this philosophical underpinning of internal consistency. So I guess I'll start there. Mark, you made quite a few points about how the scientific method gets its strength, the characteristics of it, that sort of thing. What you did not do was show that how you apply that to origins is equal to how you apply that to modern technology. It's not equal. I brought up the point that when it comes to origins, all you have is deep time extrapolation. What you do not have is what you have to do with modern technology, and that is interpolate. You're allowed to extrapolate for modern technology, but only within a very narrow band. And even at that, you have to have some way of confirming your results. You can't just sign off on it because the math works. So my question is, how do you find the internal consistency between applying the scientific method to origins versus applying the scientific method to modern technology?
Well, it's interesting that you sort of say it can't be applied to the past, because technically everything we study is in the past. Every event that's ever happened is in the past. It just depends on the time scale. There's no deep time assumption that we have. That's where the evidence leads from the scientific. And we can discover evidence about the past. Any geologist will tell you that studying rocks is looking back in time. Whether that's somebody that believes the Earth is young or old, everybody will confirm that. Things like origins, if you're saying, hey, what's the origin of the universe? We don't know. And because of that, because the Big Bang, for instance, it describes the expansion of the universe. It doesn't describe the origin. So things that the scientific method can't get evidence on, we have to say is an unfalsifiable proposition. We put it out there and say, hey, this is a hypothesis that can be tested. But if it can't be, it's just unfalsifiable. Now, I'm not holding you to the scientific method because it is so strong. But you need to provide a method that can demonstrate its strength by making sort of these a sound rationale for believing it is correct.
So real quick, let me point out then. So you said that it pretty much sounded like you said the Big Bang was unfalsifiable.
At the moment, well, no, not the Big Bang. The Big Bang is it's a theory that describes the expansion of the universe.
Okay,
so it goes back to one Planck era after the presumed origin point. Now, we can't, our sort of physics breaks down and we can't look, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, it can't go back before then. So at the moment, there's a big question mark in science over what happened then. It may not be unfalsifiable in the future, but at the moment, it does seem unfalsifiable. You can say multiverse, you can say God, how do you falsify God in that origin?
So here's one of my points. Now, I said that you are inconsistently applying how you think science is supposed to work you're inconsistently applying it to origins versus modern technology. And you kind of made my point for me, but you also at the same time, you kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? You're conflating or you're kind of hand waving past this whole idea of extrapolation. So deep time extrapolation is very different than what you do in real time medicine and engineering. It's very different. What we know from engineering, real quick, what we know from engineering is that if you write an equation to predict something, and you go outside the bounds of the known data set, you know that if you just go a little outside of the data set, the known actual witnessed or measured points that were directly measured, you go a little bit outside, you might be right, but you might be wrong. You go a little further outside of that, your equations start to generate larger and larger errors. And when you go way outside of the known data set, then you know you're going to basically mathematically render huge errors. So the further you get away from what you know, the more likely you are to be incorrect. So when you extrapolate 6,000 years, yeah, you've got a lot of room for error. But when you extrapolate 6 billion years, you've got way, way, way more potential for error. It's not the same thing what you're doing with origins. You're using literally a different method.
Yeah, okay, so you're really taking a long time to say the same thing over and over and over. So basically, what you're basically saying is the longer something is, the more inaccurate it is. And we're kind of aware of that. Engineering is not the same as theoretical physics. It just isn't.
Okay, but engineering is real practical.
Excuse me, TRock. I gave you a very long chance to talk. Now you've got to be fair, mate. When you're doing engineering, the precision is very, very delicate. Like if you're building a bridge and the precision is not good, that bridge is going to collapse and things. It's not the same as theoretical physics where, if you go to 4.6 billion years and you're out, 1%, you're out 400 million years. Yeah, it's a lot, but you're working with 4.6 billion years. If you're out 1% on a bridge, it may very well have structural integrity problems and collapse. You're trying to compare apples and oranges. And the inconsistent person here is you, who is saying, oh, for short things and things near in our past that conforms with my worldview, we can use the scientific method because it's reliable, accurate, dependable. But when we go back, and here comes the special pleading, we can't use scientific methodology because it does not conform with my worldview. And that's what you're doing. You are the one being inconsistent.
No, you've kind of made my point for me, because when you're off by 40 million years, there is zero consequence. When you're off by 1% on that bridge, there are huge consequences. You can tell the story wrong all you want with origins, and nobody literally dies because you're wrong. But in actual practical application, lives are at stake, and you have to be right.
Yeah, but that's my point. We don't presume a long amount of time. We look at things like background microwave radiation, what we understand about planets forming. We look at a lot of things. We look at the geological structures. We look at a whole wide range of evidence that all points to the same answer. And I'm really sorry if you were lied to, but it is not a young Earth and not 4,000 years. I'm sorry.
So let me point out this one other major inconsistency. So you want to use one method for modern technology, you want to use a different method for origins, but you're also trying to apply the same method that you do to origins to discover whether God exists. Now, here's the problem with that.
Okay.
If you call Joe Biden up on the phone, will he answer?
I don't know.
Exactly. Dealing with a personality is different than dealing with history, and it's different than dealing with technology. So when you go through your hit list of characteristics of good science, how do you apply that to discovering people?
What if people were real? Do you think we can not find evidence of people in the past?
Yeah, how do you do that?
Well, you look at historical accounts, you look at physical evidence, you look at all of that kind of thing.
You look at eyewitness accounts, don't you?
But you seem to have missed something vital, and that's because even if a person exists, it doesn't provide any proof for any supernatural account. And you need more evidence. I mean, you went to, if 2 or 3 people believe something, then it's true. And that's ridiculous.
That's
that means you have to believe. Well, you mentioned the passage in the Bible about 2 or 3 people believing something.
I did not say that.
Means that you have to believe in aliens. You'd have to believe in
Sorry,
Bigfoot.
I did not say that.
Then what did you say? What did you say?
I said in the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses. I did not say in the mouth of 2 or 3 believers. There's a difference.
Witnesses, yes. How can you tell that
people who have seen? So
how can you tell that they're witnesses?
Let me give you an example. How can you tell?
How can you tell that they're witnesses?
Well, one way is the same way you do with the historic method when you want to know who was president of the United States back in 1900. What do you do when you want to know who wrote the Gettysburg Address? You consult historic documents because those are the witness accounts. So let me give it.
So all historic documents are true.
Did I say that? It's the Bible that
you said
us.
If you want to know something in the past, you consult historic documents. Are you saying that all historical documents are true?
No, you're rounding my sentences off to something I'm not saying.
And what's your point? You're basically saying, hey, the historic documents that I believe are true and the ones that I don't believe are false. How can you tell? How can you tell if those historical documents are true or not? What is your methodology?
How do you tell if the historic account of what happened in Rome 2,000 years ago is true?
Very tentatively.
Very tentatively?
Yes, because the Roman emperors declared themselves gods. They, like Julius Caesar, was purported to be a god. In fact, the person that found Rome, which was Romulus and Remus, but we're talking specifically Romulus, was actually turned into a god for Rome. It was their patron god. Now, we believe that Romulus may have existed. It's tentative because we can't be sure, but we don't think he's a god. That needs its own evidence, not just that the man existed.
They turned him into a stone statue. That's antithetical to the biblical message.
But there are stories that I don't care what the biblical message is. We're talking about Romulus here. The fact that there's witnesses and evidence that he was a god does not mean, in fact, the man was a god. And that is not how historians work.
That's not what I said, though.
Yeah, and I'm saying that just because you have witnesses ages away in the past in Bronze and Iron Age that say, hey, this mystical thing, this magical thing happened, does not mean that it is automatically the truth. You need evidence for that occurrence to actually happen, not just eyewitness testimony, because eyewitness testimony is notoriously unreliable. It's why we take DNA, fingerprints. Just about any evidence is stronger than eyewitness testimony. The police know it's unreliable. You can't even get the same story about a bank. TRock, you're on mute, mate. I can't hear a word you're saying.
Oh no, you're good now, TRock.
Sorry, no, you're just flat out wrong. It's popular to say eyewitness is a weak evidence in a court of law. It is not. Every trial lawyer in the world wishes he had more eyewitnesses.
Yeah, and it can be good evidence if the subject is credible. But if that eyewitness is a murderer or somebody who's been, thieving in the past, they're not a good eyewitness, and the person won't get them on the stand because they are not credible. It all relies on that person's credibility. And with the Bible, especially the gospel accounts, we not only don't know if the person is credible, we don't know who wrote them at all.
Actually, we do. We do
certain things.
We do know, and that's the big difference between the theistic worldview is that we know. We're not guessing and we're not asking opinions. We know. So here's a real simple thought experiment.
But you can't show how you know. That's
yes,
the problem.
I can.
You just start
yes,
out
I can.
with the bias that you
how
know.
You know.
And then you look
way.
for confirmation of things that prove it to yourself. You are working on pure confirmation bias.
No,
it's not how.
No, we're not. That is an entirely false rendition of what we're doing. What I'm trying to point out is that when you want to know something in history, you're happy to go dig up a ruined city. You're happy to go dig up pottery shards that have inscriptions on them. You're happy to dig up stone tablets and read what they say and take what they say as evidence. So if you're happy to do that, you can consistently apply that to the Bible. Because the Bible is so full of history. And so
what that is evidence of jars and anything written on the jars. That's evidence of cities. That's evidence of people. It is not evidence.
Part of what you're doing is establishing, but part of what you're doing in that exercise is establishing witness credibility. So if Joshua wrote a history about the city of Jericho, and he says it was in such and such a location and such was the conditions around it, and then you go dig it up archaeologically and you confirm that Joshua knew what he was talking about, you're confirming the credibility of the witness.
So being consistent, you would have to apply that because we have stories of Romulus and that he founded Rome and that he was a god, you would have to be intellectually consistent, believe that Romulus was a god. You are having to.
No, I would not.
Because that's an exception. Even though there is evidence for witnesses saying that, you do not want to accept that as credible witnesses because you have presupposed that only one book is credible, and that is the Bible. If you are consistent from book to book, you would have to accept Muhammad. You would have to accept the deities in Hinduism. You would have to accept all kinds of things because you do not have anything else except for a book with claims. That's all you have.
So your example of Romulus, how many miracles did Romulus work?
Tons. I mean, he was a god.
Which miracles did he work?
Well, he founded the city of Rome and built it by himself. I mean,
I don't know. Exactly a miracle. That's building a city. Okay. It's within human capability to build a city.
Did Jesus create a city?
No, he healed the sick freely. Yeah, and he was not a stone statue.
But why don't you believe that? Because there's sort of stories that
I can believe that Romulus built a city. I just said I could believe it.
But he was a god. That's what the stories say.
But what are his miracles?
I don't know offhand.
Okay, I mean, that's part of the point.
The point.
He doesn't even have enough witnesses to establish his miracles.
You don't have any witnesses either. You have
Yes.
stories.
Yes, no.
Okay,
There are
bring out the
no
witnesses.
less
Let's
than
hear
about
from
7
them.
or 8. There are no
What
less
are
than
their
about 7 or
names?
8 different authors of the New Testament. It is as much a historical document as any other historical document you could pull up.
Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John.
Yes, they're historical documents.
Traditionally, the Gospels have been associated with those persons, but there is nowhere in there that says definitively that they were written by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Hell, you don't even have the originals for them. You don't have the originals.
And that's the brilliant thing about it too, because what we do have
That's
is so
brilliant.
many copies that are identical. Now here's a kind of an interesting
but you've got
lesson
copies
on
that
plagiarism.
have been changed, and we know
No,
they've been
that's
changed. Yes,
exactly the point. They have not been changed.
No, they have been, because
No,
the Pentecostal
so
walking in
many
tongues
copies.
and handling snakes was not in the earlier versions. That was added later. And then you have other Gospels that were cut out by the church, like the Gospel of Thomas. It was cut out. Why? Because it was ridiculous. It had too many fanciful tales in it. And you conveniently ignore that that was cut out and is not canon.
No, I don't. I know why. I know very well why
other
it was cut
reason than the church
cut out
decided
because
that
it
they
was
could
demonstrated
not
that Thomas
allow
was not
such a
an eyewitness,
ridiculous bunch of stories
eyewitness
into the
anything.
Bible.
So those things that are removed because they're known to not be eyewitnesses. And how do you do that? You do that contextually.
But they claim to be eyewitnesses.
Of course they do. And so you go through a process of contextual criticism. And when you read the details in the New Testament, what you find is that the details that are provided correspond from Matthew to Mark, and from Mark to Luke, and from Luke to John. They correspond across each other, even though they're obviously different.
Well, I mean, Luke seemed to, copy Matthew and the end of.
But Luke also provides details that the others don't provide, and Luke also wrote the book of Acts. And the point is that when you do an internal critique, you find out that they actually, each one corresponds with the other and confirms the other.
That doesn't make it true. And there's details in there, like who found the tomb. Was it several women? Was it one woman? Was it, who was it? Was it the women and an apostle? They have different accounts. They don't line up exactly, which is what you'd expect from a reliable document.
No, what you expect from an eyewitness.
The saints getting up from their graves and wandering Jerusalem, which is not mentioned in any other gospel. And the Romans kept pretty good records. They would have noticed 100 saints getting out of their graves and wandering the streets.
Now that brings me to another point. Are
you trying to address that? No, let's not change point. Let's address that one. Why does it say that 100 saints got out of their graves and roamed the streets?
Does it say they roamed the streets? I don't think that's what it said.
Well, if you want me to look it up, but
I do know the specific account you're referring to. There's a resurrection that is confirmed in the book of Revelation, because what you're referring to is a first fruits resurrection after Christ. And that is the power of the gospel, is that it provides hope for after death. Can you replicate that scientifically? Absolutely not. But the apostles that serve as the witnesses, number one, there's 12 of them. Number two, everything Jesus did and everything they did it in open public. So you're going to bring me to another philosophical point here about faith versus skepticism. Faith is self-perpetuating. Skepticism is self-defeating. So the biblical authors, not only did they write the originals, but faithful people came behind them and copied them and copied them and copied them and made so many thousands of copies that no other documents in history have even a fraction of a percent of as many copies as they do. Compare that to what the Romans did. If the Romans did not see what the Jews said that they saw, they could have simply just written it into history. The Jews are making all this stuff up. But guess what? The Romans did not faithfully copy their history.
Oh, yes, they did. Especially
because
we know. I'd like to address that. Please, I want to address that. You've talked and talked now. I want to address that. The Romans historically, and we know this, chronicled their defeat. So the rise of Spartacus and the slave uprising where they're defeated in battle, they recorded. The Carthaginians defeating them over in Carthage, they recorded. Hannibal using a scorched earth and burning down and attacking Rome, they recorded. The Romans were notoriously accurate record keepers.
They're
and
brilliant.
they recorded
Did
everything.
they record
Now,
a
as
direct
for the verse that
reputation
we
of
are
Jewish
talking
history?
about,
I'm going to jump. Okay,
KJV,
go ahead, Mark.
Matthew 27:53, and came out of graves after his resurrection and went into the holy city and appeared unto many. So they did roam the streets of Jerusalem after the death of Christ. And this is supposed to be scientifically accurate. These people
Say that again, Matthew 23.
27:53. It was an earthquake. It broke open the tombs. The saints rose from their graves and walked through the city. Now, do you think that's scientifically accurate?
Yes. It's historically accurate.
Really?
Yes.
It's historically accurate.
So here's
you
one of my
actually believe that these people rose from their graves, wandered around a city, and the only people to write it down were members of the church and no other historian that lived in the area at the time.
So you blew right past the point that you were making for me, and that is the Romans and their accurate history recording. Why didn't they record an accurate refutation of this?
Because they didn't know.
They could have. If they were there. Huh?
It was recorded that there was followers of Christ that believed this, but not many people believed it at the time. Why would they record a refutation of something that nobody experienced?
Because if you have a city making a bunch of commotion that's under the control of Rome, then the centurions and the Romans who were there to keep order in the city they would have been obligated to write their refutation. No, this stuff they're saying happened did not happen, because they have to report back to Caesar. Why would they not record an accurate refutation of this history if it really didn't happen?
Historians recorded that there were people that believed Christ rose from the dead. They didn't have to refute it because it just wasn't. That's just what they believed. There's no. Why would they say?
How many
hey,
recordings do we have of that explanation? I'm sorry, that's incredibly lame. They didn't need to refute it because it was just unbelievable.
Yeah,
there's a commotion going on in the city over something.
They didn't refute the barbarians' beliefs in the Germanic gods either. You know, it's not what they record. They record real events, not made up fairy tales. It's the Romans. They were very, very practical.
That's the point. If it was a made up fairy tale,
then why didn't they record it happening? If so many people saw it, why did they not even say people are claiming that dead people wandered through the streets and many people saw them, but history is absolutely silent on this point?
Logical fallacy there. Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, but
except where you would expect to find evidence and there is none. You're missing the last part.
You incorrectly expect to find evidence of. So you're saying, why don't these people?
Here's a better question then. Here's a better question. Why did none of the other apostles record it? There's a better question for you.
Why did none of the other apostles record this particular event?
People coming back from the dead, wandering the city. Why did none of the other apostles record that incredible, miraculous, insanely significant event?
Well, I would like to point out to you that there's nothing more miraculous about 100 people resurrecting from the dead than there is one person resurrecting from the dead. And all of the apostles record resurrection from the dead on individuals.
So you think that if one person is saved in a accident or something, it's no more insignificant that hundreds of people are saved?
You're conflating significance with
the
strength of the ability to do something. It's two different things. If you can raise a single person from the dead, That's pretty much as much power as you can possibly exhibit. So to raise 100 people from the dead is not significantly more powerful than raising one person from the dead.
Really?
It's more significant in the sense that you have 100 people and you consider 100 lives more significant than one. Yes. But what's the difference in the power?
A lot, 100 times, I would imagine.
And so you think...
So you think because for someone's raised from the dead, the power it takes to create that is the same as the power to raise 100 people from the dead?
It's the same authority, yes. It's like building one house versus building 100 houses.
This is the person that claims that sides, in order to do one thing, one event, one action, 100 times that action is 100 times the energy needed. I'm sorry, but that's just pure logic. You're basically arguing that.
Do you even know what spiritual energy is?
No, tell me.
Then how do you know how much more energy it takes?
What is spiritual energy?
What is a personality?
Well, a personality is a facet of your psychological states that
So you talked earlier about...
So you don't want to know. You ask questions.
Sorry, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
What is spiritual energy? I mean, I can describe what a personality is. What is spiritual energy, and how do you know it exists? How can you demonstrate spiritual energy to me?
Well, what I'm demonstrating to you is you made the comment earlier about...
No. Let's go back to spiritual energy. Demonstrate spiritual energy.
I am. I want to point out your comments about the Trinity earlier.
No. Forget that. I want to look. Don't run away. Demonstrate.
Okay, you can stop any second now and just listen, because we are talking about spiritual energy, and you keep saying that's what you want to hear, but you keep interrupting.
Spiritual energy, but you're going off to the Trinity. And it's got nothing to do with
three parts of the Trinity. So, Mark Reid, you have a physical body, you have an intellect, and you have a personality. Do you not?
I think that my intellect is tied to my personality. I think the mind is a lot more complicated than what you're pointing out. And in fact, what I think is that the brain, the physical brain, is in tied to personality. If I get brain damage, my personality and my intellect could very well change. I think that...
So let me say it a different way. You have a physical body. You have...
Well, I agree with that.
You have a logical way of thinking. You have what you know, and you have what you feel. What you know and what you feel are two different things, are they not?
Well, I think I have a conscious mind, one that, is what you would say is my intellect. I have a rational, conscious mind. And I think there is a subconscious. But I think those are two parts of the same mind, and that's what psychological studies and psychiatric studies generally tell us. I think that the mind is an emergent system from physical properties, but this doesn't get to spiritual energy. I'm trying to understand how you're demonstrating spiritual energy.
So again, you want intellect, and it has to be the default position of atheists and evolutionists who don't allow for a divine creator, and that is that you have to assume that both intellect and emotion arise from purely chemical recombination.
I don't think just chemical recombination. There's a lot of neural pathways and neural activity and
chemistry. Neural pathways are just chemistry at the end of the day.
Well, I mean, neurons, as far as I know, are electromagnetic.
That come from the chemistry of the body.
Well, I mean, I said that
nerve cells. Your nerve cells.
So you're making a fallacy. Just because it comes from chemistry doesn't mean it is chemistry. The reactions between molecules, and I'm not saying that that's not the case. It definitely is the case that it is partly chemical. Absolutely, I'm not denying that. I'm saying there's a lot more to it going on than just what you're describing.
Okay, it's complicated. I get that, but
there's memory, there's neural pathways, there's neurons, there is chemical receptors and chemicals being generated by my body that contribute. I don't deny that, but it's not all that's going on in the brain. And you know,
I'm not trying to round it down to that kind of simplicity. I know it's complex, but when you wind the clock back, you're stuck with the fact that at some point there was no life on Earth. There was just mud, water, heat, and energy. And so it had to be a long process of simple energy input and chemistry that created life, consciousness, and feeling.
So you're going off to a debate instead of showing me spiritual energy. You're going off to a debate on abiogenesis.
No, I'm actually taking this back to a
or...
scientific conclusion,
well,
because
could we have you demonstrate spiritual energy for me? Like,
yeah.
What's your evidence for spiritual energy?
Can you hold your right hand up for just a second? Okay. Why did you do that?
I don't. Because my brain sends electrical signals down my nervous system that causes muscles to contract. Therefore, expanding and contracting the muscles in such a way throughout my body as to raise my hand, pull those fingers down. All of this is understood. I'm not sure how that demonstrates. Does that
brilliant.
demonstrate spiritual energy?
What you explained was the mechanism. What you explained was the mechanism.
Isn't that what
you did not explain why.
Because you asked me to.
Okay. There you go.
Does that honestly explain spiritual energy to anybody out there? If you can raise your hand, then it's spiritual energy.
It's just like empathy and hate and love. It's an emotional construct that is not the product of basic chemistry or the energies that you think your neurons and your electromagnetic pathways have.
Empathy is an emotion based upon chemical reactions. We know that. Empathy is just an emotion that's generated.
Actually, the emotion precedes the chemical reaction.
Social circle with other social mammals. And empathy is seen throughout the animal kingdom. It's not just humans experiencing it. You know, dogs have empathy for one another. But what we find is that empathy occurs more in social mammals than it does in solo predators, for instance. It's a function of the way that us social mammals need to relate to one another in order to build functional societies. Nothing about that says spiritual energy to me. It just says that's what we need to get along with one another.
That's because you put the cart before the horse, because emotions very frequently, not always, but very frequently, emotions precede the chemical response. The emotion comes first. It's why you can pick up the phone and say something to somebody, and the next thing you know, they're crying. It's because the emotion precedes the chemical response.
So in some cases, you can generate emotion to affect somebody without being on the other side of the planet to them, and they aren't communicating with you in any way. You can just... Can we have a citation for that one? Is that being studied at all? Are you going to study that?
I talked about talking on the phone. Do we need a study to talk on the phone?
But you're saying before you even pick up the phone, they're crying.
That's not what I said.
What did you say then? I must have misheard you.
I said it's why you can pick up the phone and talk to somebody and they cry based on the input, because the emotion precedes the chemical response in their body. So the spoken word...
Yeah, I don't think that's...
The spoken word is what causes the emotional reaction, not the chemistry first.
No,
inside the body, and then
the emotional reaction is caused by the experiences they have, whether that's speech or talking, and it's also affected by the thoughts that they're having. So if somebody picks up the phone and says something sad, your thoughts are going to influence that emotion of being sad. I don't understand how that's spiritual energy in any way. And I mean, I challenge you to try and demonstrate that somehow spiritual energy is being, I don't know, funneled down the phone. Look, TRock, I've got no idea what you're on about, and I've got no idea how you're going to demonstrate spiritual energy. I mean, I wish you the best of luck.
I wish you the best of luck in demonstrating how a personality or intellect arises from chemicals climbing out of the ocean. How does that happen? So
Yeah,
what I really want to do,
doing a
I want to
debate
take a
on
minute.
as much as you want to change the subject to
I'm not changing the subject. I want to bring
Yes,
it full
you are.
circle for
Yes,
you.
you are.
No, you keep
You are
interrupting me,
trying
but I
to
just want to bring
change
it
the
full
subject
circle
to
for you. So I
abiogenesis
will do it
because
like
you're
this.
incredibly uncomfortable with the spiritual energy that apparently you can't demonstrate.
Yes, I can. It's called
Oh,
personality.
go for it.
In biblical
Personality.
terms, we call it the spirit. In secular terms, you call it personality. And there is an entire
Okay.
branch of science dedicated to studying personality. But what I wanted to do is bring it full scientific circle and point out that in functional science, the cause is greater than the effect.
So have you ever heard of split brain patients?
Of what?
Split brain patients. People that have had the connections between the two lobes of the brain split in half. When you split it down the middle and separate them, you get one lobe with one personality and one lobe with another personality. And we can access that by having them right in the other hand. And it can access the opposite side of the brain. There. Right. So the left hand accesses the right side and the right side accesses the left side. Now, those two sides exhibit different personalities. And indeed, you can have a theist side and an atheist side of the same person.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Right. So how does that spiritual energy, which you're saying is the personality, get split up in such a way that that personality changes? And all from splitting the brain.
I don't know, but I don't think scientists know either. I think they're in the midst of trying to discover something they don't understand.
There's a lot of unknowns. I would agree. There's a ton of unknowns. But what we know is that the personality seems linked to the state of the brain, up to and including the point that if we split the brain, we split the personality.
Okay, but what I want to do is bring this full circle and talk about how there is a scientific connection between personality and body and intellect. And
let me just jump in, TRock. I don't want to interrupt you. I just want to let you know, guys, we've got to go. We've got about 3 minutes on the clock. So TRock, if you want to bring it full circle, we'll let you guys engage this, I guess, final point for 3 minutes. Then we're going to move to some closings.
Okay. So what I want to point out is that in proper science, the cause is greater than the effect. So when you talk about big bangs and singularities for which there is no evidence, we've already heard testimony that it's basically unfalsifiable. So it's not good science. It actually is falsified by reason of the many contradictions it imposes. But the point is that matter cannot create matter. Energy in the physical sense cannot create energy. So the cause has to be greater than the effect, and space, time, and matter cannot create itself out of nothing. And if space, time, and matter can't do it, then nothing certainly can't do it, like the Big Bang. So whatever created the existing matter that we have today has to be outside of space, time, and matter. And so what I'm saying is your personality, because people are made in the image of God, your personality is greater than your physical body, because your personality is what directs your physical body. And so what I'm saying is that there is a type of energy that science is incapable of addressing directly, although they do attempt to do so. As I pointed out, there is an entire branch of science that studies human personality and behavior. The point is that you cannot derive that from matter and energy alone. You cannot demonstrate that. You keep telling me I can't demonstrate spiritual energy, but I can demonstrate perfectly well how personalities work, and that is the spiritual energy. But you cannot demonstrate how those arise from energy and matter, and you can't explain how matter arises from some supposed singularity either. So a better explanation to an imaginary Big Bang is that a type of energy that's outside of space, time, and matter has created not only space, time, and matter, but it has also created first life on Earth. It's also created the stars and the planets, because everything about the world that we know, there is nothing scientific about planetary formation. There is nothing known about how stars form. There are a lot of suppositions about it, but nothing known about it. And nothing demonstrable. So, but we can demonstrate personalities, and we can demonstrate that people and their personalities have the greater impact on the world than simple matter and energy.
Go ahead, Mark.
Okay, so energy cannot create energy. That is true. Matter can change energy into matter. The whole thing of, oh, there's something to cause something, so it has to be great. The cause has to be greater than the effect. No, we know from simple catalysts and things that initiate things. Like if you light dynamite with a match, that lighting of the dynamite, the cause is certainly not greater than the effect. I'll give you the tip right now. That is completely and utterly wrong and nonsense. You cannot derive from matter. Like when you're talking about Big Bang, it doesn't describe the origin of the universe. It describes the expansion of the universe. So that is a massive straw man fallacy. There are a number of hypotheses of why, and I didn't say Big Bang is not falsifiable. Big Bang certainly is falsifiable. It's the hypotheses about the origin that are unfalsifiable at the moment, and they may not be. Nothing scientific about planetary formation. You know, every single astrophysicist would definitely disagree with you, and predictions have been made on how the rest of solar systems outside our own will look based upon those models of planetary formation. So you are 100% wrong, just abjectly wrong. Now, maybe energy can't be created, but energy can change state. So if one of the hypotheses about the multiverse is true, then we have quantum fields that can spontaneously generate a universe. Now, I'm not saying that's the case because that is a hypothesis. And at the moment, we can't tell if it's true or false, but it is a hypothesis that you're determined to ignore because you have a bias for one book and one book alone, and you are not consistent in applying your standard, which is not a very good methodology across them. The whole idea that we can't explain personality, of course we can explain personality. We can even take people to psychologists to remedy personality disorders because we have an understanding of how the events in our life affect our brain and generate personality. So again, you're just demonstrably wrong. And the fact that psychology and psychoanalysis does work shows that you're 100% wrong. There's no spiritual energy in personality. They are things that we have experienced in our life that shape who we are and what we present. You're just demonstrably wrong. I don't know how else to say it. So I think I covered everything that you're after. You didn't actually give me any standard methodology of evaluation. You just said we should believe the Bible because essentially you like it. You like the idea of the Bible. You didn't give us a standard methodology we can say, hey, is this history right? Is this history wrong? All you said is we should believe your particular accounting of history because you want it to be true. And I'm sorry, that's not good enough for me. I want to know the truth, not what I want to be true. And I'll leave it there.
Okay, let me jump in, gentlemen. That wraps up the very engaging and fast-paced dialogue. Tons of fun. The audience has had a ton of fun as well. And as always, we have the best audience on YouTube. So we've got about 100 questions, and I am pumped to get to some of these. So we got a strong mix of views in the chat. So it's been very lively. Okay, TRock, there may be a few things you want to respond to there based on what Mark said, but this is what we do in the closing statement. So we do have 5 minutes for the both of you to wrap up our thoughts, wrap up our points, and address anything that we feel might be left hanging. So, okay, TRock, we're going to hand it over to you. 5 minutes, then Mark 5 minutes, then some questions. So go ahead.
Okay, so I think this whole conversation was characterized by Mark repeatedly misquoting me and misrepresenting what I said. He did this on numerous occasions. You just have to go back and listen. But the most recent was I provided no methodology for testing, and I actually did. What I said is when you read the Bible, it's a historical report, just like any other historical report that you might pick up, except that, number one, it's copied thousands and thousands of times. Both Old and New Testament are copied so many times. So one of the methodologies is compare all those copies and see the high level of consistency that's in them. The other thing that I pointed out was that you also do an internal critique, because Mark's Roman congregation that was supposed to be in Israel at the time that the Jewish history recorded in the Bible happened, they forgot to record what really happened, if that's not what happened. And so there is no external refutation. There is no secular refutation of it. It's just an argument from silence. But the methodology I'm proposing is internal critique, because there is no external critique of it. All of the external critique that does come along comes at the hands of people hundreds, even several hundred years later, and eventually thousands of years later. So the methodology is compare all the copies, find the consistencies, and follow the archaeology, see where it matches up with the historic report, and do an internal critique. And when you do that, what you find is that those other religions that Mark says I am inconsistently applying these ideas to, that I'm inconsistently rejecting them. No, I'm putting them under the same methodology and saying that they fail. They don't have thousands of copies. They don't record anything relevant. They don't start at the beginning. So when you look at things like the Muslim religion, since he brought it up, what you find is that they actually build it on biblical history from the Old Testament, and then they part ways with some of that, and then they pick up again with New Testament, and then they part ways with that. So what's the problem there is that by putting it through the methodology of looking for internal consistencies, the Muslim religion is internally inconsistent, because it accepts the written accounts that it wants and rejects the ones it does not want, instead of just accepting the whole thing. They basically write their own history in. And so like Muhammad does not have any miracles, but yet they accept the miracles of Christ, but yet they make Muhammad supersede Christ. They accept that Jesus was a prophet. They accept that he performed miracles. They even, many of them even accept the virgin birth. What they don't accept is that he was the Son of God. Instead, they let Muhammad supersede him, who neither worked miracles nor prophesied, nor was born of a virgin. He had none of that. He was just a character that apparently helped start up some wars and stuff like that, and had some writings that got preserved in history. But he pales in comparison to even the Muslim rendition of Christ. But anyway, the point is, we have methodologies, and I pointed them out, and Mark inconsistently used my worldview to evaluate my worldview, and that's how you determine inconsistencies. And so what I've done is I've pointed out that in the atheist worldview, you get to basically just make up your own history in the distant past. And he keeps talking about all these converging lines of evidence, but the Big Bang is one where there are 0 converging lines of evidence. He talked about all these models that predict, planetary or solar system.
1 minute.
There are no such models, Mark. When a star explodes, the debris fly off at something like 1/3 to 1/2 the speed of light, and there is virtually nothing out there to stop it. And there is no debris flying around in space at that speed, and there should be, if stars are responsible for the debris that eventually creates planetesimals and forms solid rocky bodies. The models that you're suggesting exist use a lot of fudge factors, and star formation is another one. Modern physicists cannot use natural physics to create a star. They have to create fudge factors to do so. So anyway, I think one of the biggest strengths of the evidence for God is the existence of intelligence and emotion, because those are not naturally arising from any chemistry that anybody knows of. We didn't get to go too much into that, but perhaps during the Q&A we will. So I'm going to have to close it at that. Thank you.
Okay, TRock, thank you so much for that 5-minute closing. To be exact, it was 5 minutes and 20 seconds. So to be fair, Mark Reid, we are going to hand it over to you for about 5 minutes and 20 seconds for your concluding statement. You're good to go.
Sure. And what keeps coming up is TRock sort of saying, hey, he said I didn't have any methodology. I didn't have any methodology at all. No, what I'm saying is he doesn't have a good methodology. That's all I'm saying. It's not consistent. It's not reliable. It's not robust. People that do it don't come up with the same answers, as evidenced by tons of Christian sects that all disagree with one another over what the Bible actually says. And he really just points to the Bible. Being copied a lot doesn't make a document true. I mean, you can have historical accounts like the Henry Tudor that copied, tons of documents. That doesn't make what he said true. In fact, we know that Henry Tudor, Henry VIII, made a whole load of probably very, very wrong documents, things that do not describe history. Muslims say the same thing. That's the thing. They say that their book is internally consistent while the Bible isn't. And I don't believe them either. He said that Muslims reject the ones you don't want. Well, that's funny when you have the Gospel of Thomas that was rejected and taken out of the Bible. Isn't that exactly the same thing? But according to him, it's special when it's the Bible. It doesn't mean the same thing when it's the Bible. Muhammad didn't do miracles. Well, that's ridiculous. What he's saying is they have no stories of them, but there are tons of stories of the miracles that Muhammad did, splitting the moon in half, for example. But to him, it's like, well, he didn't do miracles because we don't believe the narrative that he did miracles, which is not the standard that he's applying to the Bible. He's applying a different standard. So when we're talking methodologies, I'm not saying no methodology exists. I'm saying it's a bad methodology because it does not meet up with the criteria that I pointed out. Is it rigorous? Is it robust? Rigorous? Are you applying the same standard to everything? It is not consistent. This is the problem with TRock's methodology. Not that it doesn't exist, it's terrible. And when he says, we do know how planets were formed, accretion disks and astrophysicists have worked out. He says, there should be things floating around, flying at high speed. Yeah, they're called asteroids. I mean, there's tons of them out there. There's comets out there, which is, ice that are. I don't understand why you're unaware that asteroids and asteroid belts exist. And they're perfectly in line with what we know about planetary formation. It's incredible that you ignore this, where you say, there's nothing out there flying around at high speed. What? I'm sorry. I'm flabbergasted when we get hit by meteorites on a pretty regular basis. It's astounding. But I guess science progresses onwards no matter what you personally think of it. And the whole idea that we have no evidence for the Big Bang or no converging lines of evidence is patently untrue. There's redshift. There's the cosmic microwave background radiation. Those are two lines of converging evidence. Redshift, that we know that galaxies further away are moving away from us faster. And I think it was Hubble that sort of came up with that one. I honestly don't know what TRock's talking about, because we have answers for all the things that he's saying that we don't have answers for. I'm bewildered, but if you believe that much in a book and you submit to confirmation bias that your book is the one that's true, you're gonna invent some stuff to make your book true. That's how confirmation bias works, and that's why in my opening I pointed out we want to go in without confirmation bias, saying, hey, let's try and falsify it. Let's put forward a hypothesis and then subject it to some tests that we can see. But unfortunately, we can't. We can't test to see whether there's spiritual energies flying around. We understand how personalities work. There's nothing, there's still a lot of unknowns, but it's not spiritual energy. And for a long time, they tried to, people used to have mental health issues and they thought they were demons and tried exorcisms and things like that. It didn't work, because that's not how personality disorders work. It's just not. And I'm really sorry if someone lied to you and said, hey, your personality disorders, autism or hyperactivity disorder is caused by demons and spirits and magical things. They're not. I'm really sorry. Neurological disorders are not a magical thing that you cure by waving sticks or burning incense. Sorry.
Okay, Mark Reid, just on time. And that concludes the concluding statement. So, gentlemen, thank you for making for a
Thank
very
you.
engaging, memorable debate. This was a ton of fun. And, this is an important and just a great debate topic to debate. Is there reasonable evidence for God? So I'd like to do more
Yeah.
of these in the future. So those that are interested, feel free, reach out, and we'll kind of set you up with an interlocutor. So, okay, let me also remind everybody, if they liked what they heard from TRock and Mark, both of you very good debaters and presenters. So I thank you both for doing this. This was the debate today, but we've got TRock, James W., Noah's Ark Global Flood coming up. This one will be actually during one of our double header nights. Okay, so we're going to have Kent and Snake was right. Okay, so they're going to be debating transitional fossils. Do transitional fossils exist? And then right after, so it's going to be a long, busy night, but it's going to be a lot of fun because two really fun topics. Then we're going to have TRock and James W. So double header. Make sure you are here for that. And then, of course, next month, Mark Reid and Kent. This will be their second debate. Their first debate was on Noah's Ark and Noah's Flood. Same topic as TRock and James W. coming up in the future. So this one will be specifically on evolution. I'm really looking forward to this. Okay, gentlemen, break time's over. You guys ready for about 10 hours worth of questions or what?
If necessary.
Another coffee.
Yeah, that's true.
Great endurance from the both of you. We're going on a couple hours. So, okay, here we go. I'm going to set a timer for, and once that timer goes off, we'll call it a day for Mark and a night for TRock. Okay, here we go. First question that comes in is from Dustin Buck. And these are these first several questions all came in during the openings, actually. So here we go. Dustin Buck question, I am guessing for you, Mark. So let's read it and we'll find out. How do we know that there is a black hole in space? The effect it has on objects around it. Is it possible for science to look for the effect and work backwards like black holes? That's standing for truth. I think that's for you, Mark.
I don't know. I think it might be for, but maybe it is. But yeah, we can see that. We can look at things effects and then work backwards. But there's a difference between the reliability of physical effects, where we know the physics behind it, and what people say happened, sort of anecdotal reports. There's a massive difference between us. And as I kept saying over and over, the only way we can rely on anecdotal reports is if the eyewitness or the person experiencing us is credible. And sometimes not even then, because if you consider something like a mirage, it's basically, in Australia, we see them all the time. They're on the road and on planes. You basically see water and it looks like a puddle of water. And you might say, hey, there could be what? It's not water. It's just a trick of the light. So we know people can be wrong. Whereas things like physical effects, like the bending of light around that black hole, that comes under sort of, we can do these calculations and do some very solid testable predictions for how that should behave if there is a black hole.
Mark, thank you so much for that response. And TRock, we'll give you an opportunity. If there's anything you'd like to add, go ahead. And just make sure you unmute yourself.
Thank you. Okay, yeah, the question looks to me like it's pointing towards a key concept here in discovery of intelligent beings. This is what this whole conversation is about, right? But so the effect, you start by looking at the effect and work backwards from there. Absolutely. And that's the whole point behind how you approach interaction with personalities versus how you interact with technology versus how you interact with past history. It's three different approaches that you have to take. And when we're talking about personalities here, so yeah, in the scientific sense, you can apply it to cause and effect. But you can do that in a sense also, albeit differently, with personalities. So how would we do that with a personality in the context of is there good evidence for God? Well, the first effect you might notice right here on terra firma is that DNA does not create itself in nature. And so there is a high level of integration between from the atom, or from subatomic particles, to the atom, to the molecule, to the DNA, proteins, RNA, that kind of thing, to organs, to how organs are integrated with each other, to how the food source is integrated with everything. That is the effect that does not come from nature. Without knowing the starting point, how do you know anything in between here and there? You have to start with the effect, and the high level of integration is consistent with intelligent design and completely inconsistent with natural processes being the cause of the origin.
Thank you, TRock. Mark, question was for you. I just got confirmation from Dustin, so you get the last word.
Yeah, sure. I don't know when this got into an intelligent design debate, but here we are. Look, systems integrate with one another. We know why they integrate with one another. It's survival mechanisms and various other natural mechanisms working in tandem with one another. I for some reason, in all of this these natural things happening, and do keep in mind that I said evidence against one thing is not evidence for your other proposition. So evidence against natural, say, abiogenesis or evolution is not evidence for a God. You've got to come up with that evidence instead of going, oh, well, this. So it's basically an argument from incredulity. I personally don't believe this could have happened as a natural process, therefore God. It's a logical fallacy. It's a terrible argument. And just because we don't know for sure how life arose doesn't mean that you get to insert your God into that gap in knowledge. That's God of the gaps. It's called the argument from ignorance. Thanks, Donnie.
Okay, appreciate the question, Dustin. The answer is Mark and TRock. Ashley Myers says, this has been intense. Great work, guys. Yes, thank you so much for making for an awesome.
Cheers. Thanks, Ashley. Appreciate it.
Okay, here we go. SWE with the $10 super chat. She's always putting my kids through college or taking care of my coffee addiction. So cheers. Okay, here we go.
Shout out. Yeah.
Shout out to SWE. So question is going to be for you, TRock. So she's asking you, and looking on the side here, we've actually got a few questions from her. So here we go. Aren't these clear contradictions? Exodus 20, verse 5. I am the Lord God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children. And Deuteronomy 24:16, no one will die for the sins of his father.
Yeah, good question. There's nothing wrong with the question, except that it does miss the context in both cases. Exodus 25, I am the Lord God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children. It goes on to say into the third and fourth generation. Visiting the iniquity is not the same as putting someone to death. So the Deuteronomy quote here is actually somewhat incomplete, and I'm going to read the full verse from the King James Version. It says, make sure I get the right verse here. The fathers shall not be put to death for the children. It does not say, again, visiting the iniquity and being put to death are two different things, but it says the father shall not be put to death for the children, neither shall the children be put to death for the fathers. Every man shall be put to death for his own sin. We're talking about the difference between the, I don't know, how do I say this, but the downhill effect of sin versus the corporal punishment or the basically the death sentence for a specific crime or sin, as it were. So yeah, it's not an inconsistency at all. It's context, and whether you're talking about the effects that happen down the road or the immediate penalty for a given sin and how it's distributed.
Thank you there, TRock. And Mark, we can hand it over to you if you had any thoughts, points you wanted to make.
Yeah. So putting aside the horrible morality of sort of punishing somebody's son for what their father did, there's a lot of contradictions like this in it. I pointed out the one of the who found the tomb, the women, or one woman, or a woman apostle. That there's a few different versions in there, and that this isn't the only problematic contradictions that you can find in the Bible. There's a ton of them. So yeah.
Okay, Mark, appreciate it. And TRock, we're going to give you the last word since the question's for you.
Yeah, the horrible morality comment doesn't really fit with a naturalistic world, because chemicals don't care what they do to each other. And again, it highlights what I already said in my presentation, that whenever you don't have an absolute standard, you can call morality whatever you want. The next guy that comes after you is going to decide that your morals are horrible. Besides that, he also went on to talk about the supposed contradiction in the number of people visiting the tomb. What he's done is called a subset fallacy. If I see one person and you see three, that doesn't mean we're contradicting each other. It means we have two different vantage points, and you saw more than I did. That's not a contradiction.
Okay, thank you, TRock, for that final word. So super chat just came in from Dustin Buck. Looks like it's a question related to his first question here. Maybe he's expanding on it. So for you, Mark, here, so he's saying the black hole was an analogy for the absence of evidence, but the conviction of a belief. Scientists expect us to believe in these things, but we don't even see the black. But I guess more of a comment, if there's anything you want to.
Yeah, I think he's just clarifying his question. Sort of, maybe I addressed it wrong. But I understand what you're saying, Dustin. That the black hole, we can't see anything inside the black hole because even light can't escape it. So it hits the black hole. It passes the event horizon, which light can't even escape beyond that point. The thing is here, it's not an absence of evidence, because the evidence we have is the way that the gravitational force of that singularity is affecting everything around it, planets, stars, even entire galaxies. For instance, in the center of the Milky Way, there's Sagittarius A, which is a black hole, and we can sort of tell from the way that even light bends around that black hole that it is actually there. Now, that's a lot of unknowns in that black hole, but when you say absence of evidence in relation to a black hole, that's not correct. We still have evidence that that black hole is there and is exerting a gravitational force that even light is affected passing it by. So I'm really sorry, but you're not correct when you say an absence of evidence. Maybe an absence of visual evidence, but that's not the only kind of evidence out there.
Thank you, Mark. And TRock, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, that's kind of along the lines of what I'm thinking. Some things are only known by the effect, not by direct observation. And I mean, that is a scientific thing that has to be dealt with. Some things you just do not know by any other means than the effect. And that is the analogy for using this term spiritual energy, talking about personalities. That's how you know anybody's personality, by the effects that it produces. So and with that, again, how do you apply that in the real world? Some things, like what we talked about before, like creator or not creator, there are false dichotomies, but then there are real dichotomies where there are only two choices. It's completely binary. It's either this or not this. It's either naturalism or it's intelligent input. There is no in between. And so the evidence here that we know only by the effect is highly indicative of intelligence and highly inconsistent with naturalism.
Thank you, TRock. Mark, you get the last word.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, I've already addressed the whole issue that eyewitness accounts isn't the same as collecting data from light traveling around a black hole, so I'll leave that one alone. But what I find is really interesting is that you say that sometimes real dichotomies exist, and then you go on to support intelligent input, which isn't actually what you're arguing. You're arguing for specifically God. So you've basically shifted the goalposts to say, hey, it can be any intelligent input. What about aliens? They're intelligent input, and they're also a naturalistic reason. So all I need to do to prove your dichotomy false is provide one other explanation that is not God and not naturally occurring. And I have. It's aliens. So your dichotomy is slaughtered. It is a false dichotomy. It is absolutely useless. And your attempt to shift the goalpost to intelligent input is so telling that you basically will not defend the God prong of that supposed dichotomy.
All right. Thank you, Dustin, firstly for the question, the support, and thanks for the answers, Mark and TRock. Okay, we got a solid mix of questions for the both of you, so we'll get one for you now, TRock. This, again, another $10 super chat from SWE. Appreciate the support, and as always, the solid questions for us to engage. Okay, so she... let's see here. So she's saying, here's a recent paper about chimpanzee and similarity. Still says 98 to 95%, mentions nothing about it being overturned. Scientific Reports, Volume 12, Article 591, 2022. So, more of a comment. So the question could be, what are your thoughts on this recent paper and data, TRock?
So there's a saying about statistics, and it's similar to a saying about astronomy. And that is, there are lies, there are damn lies, and there are statistics. In other words, statistics tell you what you want them to tell you. And so this 98 to 95%, this paper that you're talking about, a couple things really stand out there. Number one, that is the epitome of cherry-picked data, because if you were to line those genomes up side by side and compare them letter by letter, you would never come up with 98%. You'd probably come up with more like 2%. So you go about it a different way. You compare proteins that are similar. What do you not compare? Well, you have to strip out what you don't want because it's not going to tell the story you want. But for example, the Y chromosome is nowhere near 98%. And so there's a paper on creation.com that's probably worth looking up on this, that does a pretty good job of refuting this idea. And the other idea that stands out here about this 2022 article, nonetheless, is that you can print a lot of stuff in a scientific journal, and you basically, much of the time, what you're really doing is presenting an opinion. You're looking for acceptance, but the question is, does it stand the test of time? And this, whatever they've done here, they've ignored some of the different ways to calculate your statistics. Even at 2%, there's still a huge problem with this story anyway. It's called the waiting time problem. But in essence, go to creation.com, look at an article. It's called Greater Than 98 Chimp Human DNA Similarity, Not Anymore. And they do a pretty good job at deconstructing this idea and showing that it really is just statistical smoke and mirrors.
Appreciated, TRock. Mark, over to you for your response.
Okay. Don't go to creation.com. I would recommend BioLogos, who are theists. They're Christians. It includes, I believe, Francis Collins is a usual contributor on here. Now, Francis Collins is a very devout Christian who also was head of the Human Genome Project at one time and contributed greatly to human genome mapping. Now, this isn't statistical data analysis, so I don't know what TRock's talking about. It's genome mapping and analysis of comparative genomes. It's not, statistics is a completely separate field. They compare like males to males and females to females. So the Y and X chromosome has nothing to do, literally nothing to do with it. And the reason why it says 98 to 95, because it does depend on how you compare them that comes up with these numbers. But this is the same genome analysis they do when they're comparing to see, ancestry.com, see if you're related to somebody, or they're doing a comparison to see if you're the father of a child. It's exactly the same process. And I mean, TRock wants to go, well, it's not scientific. Every single geneticist knows this. And he wants to say that some theologist over at Creation knows better. I'm really sorry that if you were lied to and sort of said, hey, chimps and humans only have 2%, I believe, he gave the thing of DNA similar, that is absolutely ridiculous. I'm really sorry, but that is correct, and it's been done recently, and nothing has overturned it. And if you believe Francis Collins, a theist who has contributed so much to mapping the human genome, it never will be. Sorry.
TRock, appreciate it. Or Mark, appreciate it. TRock, question was for you. Get the final word.
So what I heard Mark say was, don't talk to people who disagree with us. Only talk to people who agree with us, and you'll see we're right. No, that's not how peer review works, for one. For two, he kind of made a false analogy about how you do mutation comparisons to identify or genome comparisons to identify relatives. There's a lot more to it than that. That's only a small piece of it. You take the mice, the studies on mice, for example, where they basically reverse mutations to try and drive back to what the genome was, generations in the past. And the result is that you typically increase the longevity of the mouse. If you reverse the mutations in people, you do not devolve them into chimps or anything similar to a chimp. If you undo the mutations in people, you increase their fitness level. So not comparing apples for apples at all.
All right, moving on to the next question. Great question so far. And the next one comes in from, let's see here. We'll find one from Mark now. Okay, here's one from Power Word. Power Word, question for Mark. The historical document called the Report of Pilate, the Procurator, exists and details the zombie resurrection event of Old Testament saints. Have you or have you not read this?
No, it doesn't. It doesn't say that. There's only one place that is written down, and that's in Matthew. There's no. The report says that that Christians say Jesus was crucified and rose from the dead. It doesn't say that. I'm really sorry, it doesn't. I mean, I can get it up and have a look at it.
Are we done?
Yeah, no, it doesn't say that. Yeah, I'm unaware of it if it says it. So, do correct me if it does say that.
Okay. TRock, if there's anything you'd like to add, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'll be honest with you, I'm not familiar with this at all, but it does kind of highlight what I was talking about, what Mark described as very weak methodology or very improper methodology, whatever. No, the methodology is essentially the same. It's internal critique, it's external critique, it's archaeology. They all come together. It's not a different methodology than how you investigate any other history. So this report of Pilate the Procurator, there are tons of extant documents that kind of say similar things to what the Bible says. What there are not is external documents that refute what the Bible says. So yeah, I would totally accept this as evidence that that kind of collaborates things that the Bible says.
Okay, appreciate it, TRock. Mark, if there's any final words you wanted to, I'm not much of help on this either. I've never heard of that specific.
No, I think that there's sort of a lot of documents that are floating around that sort of copied from the Bible. We know that some of the reports from a couple of the historians at the time were fabricated to support, and even biblical scholars discount them, and we know that they're fabrications made by certain individuals trying to either placate the church or get in good with the church. That report that you're referring to, really, we would have to analyze the historical validity of it and see whether it was written by who it says it's written by, and whether it does in fact say that. But I've never heard of any report outside the Bible that's been verified that's confirms this zombie invasion.
Okay. Thank you so much, Power Word. Thanks for the responses, gentlemen. And next question here, we'll get one now for you, TRock. And this one comes in from God, teach me to pray your word. Question for TRock. Why do you focus on biblical evidence debating someone that resists it when scientific evidence is so strong?
No, that's a good question. It's a fair question. The answer is I'm limited by time here, but the original goal was to piece together three important parts, and science is absolutely one of them. That was in my presentation. But like I said, for a worldview to be consistent, it has to be consistent philosophically and logically. It has to be scientifically correct, and it has to be historically correct. So I agree. Scientific evidence is very strong. What I wanted to do is paint the full picture, because the opposing view fails on all three accounts. They change their history when they think they have a reason to. They're internally inconsistent. As I pointed out, they apply deep time extrapolation for origins, but they cannot do that in real time technological advancement. And scientifically, they just fall to pieces. The Big Bang was that example, one of many examples, but they have nothing to start the Big Bang. They have nothing to start or stop inflation. They have nothing to cause star formation. They say they do. An example, again, time limited by the amount of time to present all this evidence is basically my biggest weakness. But for example, I was quoted as saying that there are no high-speed objects. That's not what I said. What I said was that when a star explodes, the projectile velocity is something like 1/3 to 1/2 the speed of light. The asteroids we see flying around, the comets we see flying around, even the Earth itself, the Earth moves at about 67,000 miles per hour. That's a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of what the projectile speed of an exploding star would be. So yes, there are high velocity objects, but they're not moving fast enough for an exploding star. But anyway, that is essentially why I was trying to put the entire picture together and not just strictly focus on scientific evidence, because the God of the Bible is above the physical world anyway. And part of that is out of respect for God, that he is a spirit, not to be tested the same way, or not to be tested at all. But you certainly cannot investigate the existence of God through physical sciences. And that was one of the other points I tried to bring out.
Appreciate it, TRock. Mark, over to you.
Yeah, so the reason why TRock has to go to evolution and abiogenesis and try and show these are false and set up false dichotomies with, if it wasn't occurring naturally in nature, then it has to be God, is because he doesn't have scientific evidence. He has nothing that points conclusively to a God or to his conclusions. He just presupposes that's the case. The whole thing about the asteroids is because you've got gravity, and he's forgetting to factor that in, that they capture these asteroids, and that's how accretion disks form. And it's very, very complicated, but just because he doesn't understand the science doesn't mean that you get to put God in a place. It's an argument from ignorance. And I'm not saying TRock's ignorant. I'm saying because we are ignorant of something, that we don't know something, doesn't mean that you get to put God in there. It's called God of the gaps. You've probably heard of it before. You cannot just prove something wrong or say, oh, we've got evidence against abiogenesis, therefore God. No, science doesn't work like that. And the reason why he thinks he's got scientific evidence is because he doesn't understand how science works. He doesn't understand that science is always falsifiable. It's an inherent property of science. And like I was very generous, I said, hey, you can have other methods, but the methods that I've been shown is pure bias. So I can't do anything with that. I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you, Mark. TRock, final word. Question was for you.
Yeah, can you put the question up one more time?
Sure. Let me. We got a lot of questions. Hopefully, I can find it now. It was the question from. Oh, here it is. Okay, so right.
Oh,
Why do you focus?
okay, good enough. Anyway, in response to Mark's response, Mark, I very well understand application physics. Any accretion disk that you want to assume existed and formed, the accretion disk itself has to be, the particles in it have to be spinning very, very fast. Gravity cannot take something moving, so the speed of light is 186,000 miles per second. Compare that to Earth's velocity of 67,000 miles per hour. Um, Gravity cannot explain that difference in velocity. Basically, what's going to happen is you're going to slingshot it away from the whatever cluster you think is forming. How do you even get a cluster in outer space when something explodes? It's going in 3 dimensions. The particles are doing nothing but getting further apart. As soon as one encounters any type of body, the first thing it has to logically encounter is a star, because you don't have planets yet. You're trying to form them. Anyway, I perfectly well understand what the application physics says about it, and it is extremely ignored in the open literature because it is so problematic. They come up with fancy stories and supposed models, but if you read the literature close enough, what you find out is they don't actually have a comprehensive, accurate model based on modern physics. And as far as the false dichotomy thing goes, it's not a false dichotomy, either naturalism or intelligent design. It's one of the two. And so intelligent design is a starting point for proving the God of the Bible, and pushing it off to aliens, that is not a third option. All you're doing is pushing evolution back to some other place that you can't investigate. So yeah, that's it.
Okay, thank you so much. And now we're going to get a question for you, Mark. So this one comes in from Assembly of God. Question for Mark. Quantum mechanisms such as quantum tunneling is strong evidence for a God. How do you explain the spookiness?
Yeah, Assembly of God. I love the name. It's awesome. Quantum tunneling. So this is basically the way that quantum particles seem to be able to pass a solid barrier without occupying the intervening space. It's necessary in a whole bunch of different particle interactions and things that occur throughout our reality. Now, I'm no quantum physicist. It is very spooky. I'll give you that. It is very spooky. But again, sort of saying, well, God causes it. We find no evidence of God. It just seems to be the behavior of particles in fields. And it's very predictable. We don't see the hand of God in anywhere. And just because we don't understand everything about quantum physics doesn't mean that you get to insert God any more than because the Greeks didn't understand lightning, they get to insert Zeus. I'm really sorry, but thank you for the question. That's funny.
Thank you, Mark, and the questioner and TRock. Hand it over to you.
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot to say about that, except that one of the fallacies that always comes out in these types of discussions is the claim that there is no evidence for your position. Completely bogus, because we all have the same evidence. If you have similarities between human DNA and chimp DNA, I have the same similarities. You don't have different evidence. The difference is the worldview and how you interpret the evidence. Do your interpretations line up with the evidence? That's probably a little more appropriate. So in dissecting the difference between randomness and intelligence, I think, some of the analogies that are commonly thrown out there, such as when leaves fall out of a tree, can they write a word on the ground? Of course not. Why not? Because it's too specific. All it takes is basic mechanical energy to make the leaves land in a certain pattern. It doesn't take anything nearly as complex as what it takes to assemble DNA in a living cell, that sort of thing. So how does anybody discern the difference between randomness and intelligence? It's by the specificity. Again, very simple things that natural processes cannot do, but intelligence can. So demonstrating intelligence is a necessary step towards demonstrating the God of the Bible is real.
All right. And Mark Reid, final word. Question was for you.
Well, that didn't have a lot to do with quantum physics at all, but let's address it. So when you say we have the same evidence, no, that's not what we have. We have the same facts, and that's where you're going wrong. Evidence is how you apply those facts to your conclusion. So, like I said, and I outlined this really well, you have somebody lying dead with a gun. Now, you might say, hey, that's evidence of a murder, and that's what you're doing. That's evidence of a God, but you're not being rigorous. You're not saying, hey, what else is it evidence of? Could it be evidence of a suicide? Could it be evidence of an accident? Yes, it can be, but you're ignoring that and just saying, no, it's evidence of a God and a God only. And that's where you're going wrong. We have the same facts. You just don't have a good method for applying that into evidence. But, let's look at DNA. You're saying specificity. No, this is exactly the same argument as complexity means design, and complexity does not mean design. In fact, simplicity is a hallmark of design because we want things to be as simple as possible. Complexity is actually a trait that we see in natural formation, things that occur naturally. And the problem with that is, if your worldview is correct, everything is designed. Right? You don't have anything occurring naturally because the rocks, is that naturally occurring? No, it's designed. The space particles, is that naturally? No, it's designed. The stars, are they naturally occurring? No, it's designed. If you do not have anything non-designed to compare it with, how are you making this claim that specificity signals design? Because everything's designed in your worldview. So I don't know what you're making a comparison about. It's a terrible argument. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. We're going to start winding it down here now. I would say with the last couple questions that we have, I want to make sure we get to the super chat. So next one here comes in from SWE. We got it up on screen here. And she asks, this one's going to be for you now, TRock. What about Apollonius, hopefully it's, I don't know, probably butchered that, of Tiana? He had followers that were convinced he rose from the dead too.
Okay, Apollonius of Tiana. So there's a key difference here. The apostles that witnessed Christ's resurrection, they basically died for what they knew to be true. And so one key difference, I can't remember who it is. There's a very well-known apologist, and I can't remember his name, that brings this point out. Anyway, you can have people die for what they believe to be true, but you do not have people willingly die for what they know to be false. It's a really, really odd thing to imply that somebody willingly dies for what they know is false. So I would say that's probably one of the key dividers here is the apostles died for what they knew to be true. They did not die for what they knew to be false. And so how does that factor in with the Apollonius of Tiana? I don't know the story real well, but I suspect what you're going to find is that either his followers did not die for what they knew to be, well, they definitely did not die for what they knew to be false, but they probably did not die at all, for one, and they were probably not even, their life was probably not even offered up as a punishment for what they believed anyway.
All right. Thank you, TRock. Mark Reid, any thoughts on Apollonius of Tiana?
Yeah, and stupid high energy love saying a name. It's not the only. Yeah, it's stupid. Poor Angie. Her energy is correct, whether that be spiritual or otherwise. No, look, there's been a ton of cults and religions and things out there whose followers have all died for them. Like, so if here's the problem with TRock's consistency, because he's saying that people would not willingly die for what they would know to be false, but they died for what they believed to be true. So that suggests their beliefs are true. But that isn't the case, because we have people, especially in Islamic, who die willingly. In fact, they blow themselves to smithereens in order to die for what they believe to be true. And he doesn't think that's true. Why not? If you're applying the standard of people dying for what they believe to be true is in fact true, then why aren't we applying the same standard to every other cult or religious sect or fringe bunch of people who are willing to die for it? And there are a lot out there. Now, not all of them can be right, because if all of them are right, it would conflict with one another. You can't have, some sort of worshipping sect that is consistent with the classical idea of God. So not all of these people can be right, but guess what? All of them can be wrong. Dying for something that you think is true is no indication of whether the thing itself is actually true. It just means that people believed it. And we've got throughout history a ton of people dying for a ton of things that they believe is true. Doesn't make it true. Sorry. Go TRock.
Go ahead, TRock. Final word.
So yeah, that was a very wordy rebuttal without a single specific example to follow. In the case of the apostles, they were in the position to know the truth of whether they actually witnessed Christ's resurrection or not. And so if you've got some specific example you want to compare that to, go ahead. But I think your rebuttal is so generic and so unspecific that you can't possibly be comparing some real world example to what we're describing in the Bible.
All right, guys, thanks so much. And just when I was going to wrap it up, we got 2 more super chats that just came in. So let's do a speed round on these 2. Okay, Mark, they look like they're
Yeah, man,
for
I'm
you.
game.
Okay, appreciate it. So speed round on these 2, the never-ending Q&A. So here we go.
Are you getting tired? Are you all right to still remain up for these?
I'm good. I'm good.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay, good. Let's go.
All right, cool. Love it. Okay, so here we go. One from Dustin Buck. I told you the live chat's engaged tonight. This has been a blast of a debate. So Dustin Buck, $10 super chat for Reid. Dustin's coming for you, Reid. So he asks, how do you explain the shape, just kidding, the shape, I'm guessing, of our galaxy with the vast distance the stars have to travel from the center to the edge? How did the galaxy keep its shape for so long of time?
Yeah, so the galaxy is the Milky Way, which is I can't remember the name for it. It's basically a star where the edges trail, right? So it has these arms, and we're on one of the outer arms of the spiral Milky Way, and it spirals in a circle with the inside sort of going a bit faster than the outside, and so it spirals. And that's all because of the gravity in the center. So your answer to that is how it keeps its shape. It's gravity. So it's like when you ask how 2 satellites keep geosynchronous orbit, like they basically one goes around the other. Yeah, the ones around the edges are traveling faster than the ones in the center. And that's well understood as it wheels around Sagittarius A, the black hole with an immense amount of gravity in the center. Now, that's just my understanding of it. And I must admit, I'm not an astrophysicist, so they could probably tell you a lot more about how it does keep its shape. But that's my understanding of it.
All right, Dustin Buck, appreciate your questions tonight and your super chats. TRock, over to you for your thought.
So what he's referring to is a spiral galaxy, which is what the Milky Way is, spiral galaxy. And there is a particular problem, and its solution in mainstream science is basically just storytelling. But the idea here is that a spiral galaxy, the center turns faster than the outer arms do, and so it should be winding itself up over time. And Jason Lisle has a mathematical model that you can look at to see what it should be doing if it were, billions of years old. And that is, it basically winds itself into a blur so that the arms are no longer distinct anymore. And this problem is, it's actually very closely related to what I was describing about a star exploding, and then you have the projectile mass coming off of it. So over time, if you have a planetary body, you have to grant them the planet because they don't have one yet. But if you have a body of any kind of mass with gravity that can attract a flying object, the faster that thing is moving, the more elliptical the orbit is going to be. And if it's too fast and too elliptical, then it's not going to get captured at all. But the point here is that's relevant to how galaxies should wind themselves up over time, is that when you look out and you see things orbiting around the sun, for the billions of years of history that supposedly have passed, there should be no oblong orbits. They should all be very, very round, because the gravitational tension between the bodies should basically cause an elliptical path to get more and more circular. So it's similar but different to the problem with the galaxies. And yeah, there is not a secular solution to this. It's just basically they impose something like dark matter to solve it, which means they don't see anything.
All right. Thank you, TRock and Mark. We're going to give you the last word.
Yeah, again, so dark matter is one proposed hypothesis to how they do think dark matter exists. They just can't find it. But as I've said again and again, simply saying we don't have an answer to something is logically fallacious. It's an argument from ignorance. It's basically saying because you don't have an answer for something, therefore God. No, you need your own evidence for God. Just simply saying that something is wrong doesn't get you any closer to God. And I mean, I can't hammer this enough. It seems like, I'm really sorry, TRock, but it seems like it's not sinking in. And plus, yeah, you've got to remember that the rotational period is like 240 million years. So you've got to keep in mind that we're moving fast, but the rotation of this thing is extraordinarily slow, like beyond glacially slow. If you want to do an internal critique of it, then you have to accept that that's the amount of time it takes for us to go round. And, there's other things like we're drifting into and we're going to collide with another galaxy at some point. But the time frames involved are so massive that you can say, oh, it seems to keep its shape. Yeah, but it's not. It just takes so long for us to make one rotation that you expect to see things straight away. And galaxies and the universe doesn't work on straight away. It doesn't work in my lifetime, and it doesn't work in your lifetime. And that's just the reality of the matter. And you can't say, well, it should. The reality doesn't care what you think should happen. That's just how it is. Thank you.
Oh. No, thank you guys for, again, making for such a good debate. This is an awesome topic, and you guys were the perfect debaters for it. So, okay, here's this one that came in as well. Boomer 21. Thanks so much for the super chat, the support. Another one for you, Mark. So, questioner asks, evidence of God is all around us, from Petra to the pyramids. How can you ignore these examples that claim fallen angels, for one?
Yeah, I'm not sure. Like, there's a lot of, Petra, I know that's a ruin carved into a canyon. I'm a little bit unfamiliar with that one. But the pyramids, there's been a lot of different hypotheses for the pyramids. One was that they couldn't have possibly built it. Then it moved to slaves doing it. But where do they get the rollers from in a desert? I saw one hypothesis that they used papyrus and water to lift the blocks in water because you can actually use buoyancy for a lifting mechanism, was one proposed solution. Other people have said, hey, it was aliens. which I don't believe for the same reason why I don't believe it's a God. There's no evidence for it. But again, and I'm going to harp on this again because it doesn't seem to be getting through. Just because we don't know how something was done does not give you a God of the gap. You don't get to insert God just because we don't know how something was done. You need evidence for that God, and good, solid, reliable, rigorous, good evidence, which we haven't seen today. All we've seen is attacks on other hypotheses, some stories from people, and adding up to almost nothing. I don't know how else I can get this across. And you know, I don't know where fallen angels come from, because usually the stories I hear about the pyramid from theists is that God helped man build it. So, you know, add another hypothesis to the pile, I guess.
Okay, TRock, real quick response, then a real quick response from Mark, because there's 2 more super chats that I almost missed, so we're gonna have to get through those. I told you it's a wild one tonight. So Mark or TRock, go. Actually, TRock, you're on mute, brother.
Yeah, no problem for me. I'm good on time. But
Okay.
as far as everybody else, you guys, whatever you need to do is fine. Anyway, so evidence of God is all right. Absolutely. And so my arguments all along have not been, oh, your position looks wrong, therefore mine must. That's not what I'm doing. What I'm doing is deconstructing individual arguments to show that when you apply proper methodology, you cannot come to the conclusions that naturalism comes to. The galaxy example was a classic, because dark matter is basically, in a very simple sense, it just means some matter that you can't see. There's nothing spectacular about it. It doesn't have special properties. It can literally be a rocky planet that you just can't see. Anyway, the point there is I'm deconstructing an old Earth argument, or an old universe argument, to help come back into line that with proper methodology, you cannot come to those conclusions, but you can come to the conclusion that the world is created from a source external to space-time and matter. Anyway, so this is pyramids, another great one. Go look at some ancient archaeology. Is an awesome way to establish the credibility of biblical history, because all we have ever known from people who can actually communicate through writing is high intelligence, which is a prediction of the Bible. What we do not see is civilizations full of, half wit, half ape, half humans trying to grunt their way into civilization. So yeah, bring the pyramids, bring Hindstone, bring the megaliths in South America. You can basically use a biblical history to find exactly what was happening there, and even solve some of the problems that the professionals want to resort to, aliens of all things, and some kind of advanced technology that no longer exists. There's a whole other conversation that needs to happen there. Yeah.
Thank you, TRock. Mark, last word.
Yeah, just quickly, I would argue against aliens as well, for exactly the same reason I'd argue against God. I'm not using that as an excuse. I'm just saying it's another hypothesis that you can throw in there. I don't believe that either. It's funny that you say you're not just attacking. I mean, you went from abiogenesis to planetary formation to the origin of the universe, just other things that are gaps in our knowledge from one to another to another. So it's kind of, weird that you say, oh, I'm not just doing this. And then you're sort of inserting your conclusion in where any gap, I just want to point out that Easter Island was another one that was sort of lumped in with these, couldn't have happened by natural means, until someone figured out the way that they actually did it on Easter Island with the big monoliths. They actually tied ropes around them and walked it like you'd walk a bookshelf, and they found the divots where they'd walked these massive statues. That one's solved, although, it just shows that we have these claims that, it was something extraordinarily, we'll never figure it out, and then we figure it out, and it's just one example. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate the thorough responses here. Again, this has been a ton of fun, this audience Q&A. So this one comes in from Sunflower. Sunflower, thank you so much for the support. Thank you so much for the question. So question again is for you, Mark. And he asks, a miracle like being raised from the dead is akin to the concept of infinity within materialistic probability. Infinity times 100 actually is not bigger than infinity, mathematically speaking.
Yeah, and if it was maths, I would agree with you, but it's not maths. It's something happening in reality. Maths is an abstraction. If you understand that, Sunflower, it's just the way we think about things. We don't even know if infinity exists, because in order to quantify and count to infinity, you can't stop. So we don't even know for sure. It just is a thing in maths that we can assign a value to, infinity. And there may be values of infinity, so you may actually be wrong, but it's very hard to tell, because when we're employing maths, we're employing abstract concepts, while this event is something that happens in reality and therefore should require a quantifiable amount. Now, if you want to claim God's infinity, great, demonstrate that. Go for it. Knock yourself out.
Thank you, Mark. TRock, the floor is yours.
So, very good point that Sunflower brings out. Like I said, how do you know what kind of energy it takes to raise somebody from the dead? In reality, statistics don't and probability do not bode well at all for naturalism. Zero. Abiogenesis being one of the obvious targets, but abiogenesis is actually would be a much, much bigger miracle than raising somebody from the dead.
Okay, Mark, final word.
Yeah, that's interesting that you're now appealing to statistics and probability, when I quite clearly heard you saying there was three types of lies, damn lies, and statistics. So what's interesting is when it's convenient for you, statistics are just lies that should be ignored. And when it's convenient for you that statistics are something that should be relied upon for inherent truths. I think that's very telling of your inconsistent position over the course of this debate. Thank you.
All right. And I also want to thank again the entire audience for so many awesome questions. So here we go. I think this is, I think we made it. We got through the super chats. And final question here from Sunflower, another super chat. Thanks so much. And I'm guessing it's going to be directed at you, Mark. So let's work through it together. So he says, Christianity came to be against all odds. Christ was crucified, and following him was punishable by death. It is now the largest religion on earth. The same cannot be said for any other religion. Any thoughts on that, Mark?
Yeah, and I just want to give a big shout out to Sunflower. Good questions, mate. And it's really good to see you here. The fact that Christianity came against all odds, I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think that Christianity's success had a lot to do with Emperor Constantine of the Eastern Roman Empire adopting it as the main religion. And there's been a number of hypotheses about why he did that. Maybe it was true. Maybe he found it a way to placate the lower class and use it as a weapon against the nobles that were threatening his reign. Maybe he just found it a very good philosophy to. We don't know, and that's the problem. Christianity, the Romans did accept Christianity. That there were outliers of Christians being punished, but the Romans had a very they let religions flourish within them. Just not to upset the local populace that they ruled over. I don't think it's necessarily to say that it was against all odds. It definitely had some struggles and difficulties in getting established, but I think that against all odds is kind of a bit hyperbolic.
All right, Sunflower again. Thank you so much, Mark. Thank you for the response. TRock, the floor is yours.
Yeah. So another great comment there. Not really a question, but one of the interesting things about Christianity is that it acknowledges a problem and provides a solution that alternative worldviews, including alternative religions, cannot address, and that is entropy. And so entropy is the death knell of naturalism. Entropy dictates a whole lot of things about the formation of the universe, formation of planets, formation of first life. This mythical idea of evolution from microbes to people. Entropy is ever present and is constantly tearing things down. We don't need to get too far into that, but what Christianity does is acknowledges that the physical world is subject to entropy. So the gospel message is that Christ has a way to overcome that entropy. And what the gospel message says is, hey, there was loss, but we have a way to fix it. And that fix is resurrection from the dead. But more specifically, when you talk about against all odds, one of the proof points that I wanted to bring out that I didn't really have time to had to do with prophecy. And that is that there is a particular prophecy that is really stunning, and it really does set Christianity and, the entire Bible, Old and New Testament, apart from every other religion that's ever come about on earth. And that is, there's a super specific prophecy in the Bible that relates to Israel coming back as a nation again. And what it says is the prophet Ezekiel was commanded to lay on his side for 390 days for the sins of Israel, and then 40 days for the sins of Judah. And then each day was to represent a year. And so there's some math that has to be done there, because each day is a year. You add them together, you get 430 days. But that was supposed to be the punishment for the nation of Israel as a whole. 430 years in exile. But there's a catch, two important pieces to put together. One is that they had already served 60 years, or maybe it was 70 years, something like that anyway. So it reduces the sentence somewhat. But then there's a separate prophecy in a completely different time and place that says, hey, if you are reprimanded for your sins, you get this punishment. But if you don't repent after the reprimand, you get an additional punishment on top of that. And that is found, I believe, in the book of Deuteronomy, where he takes and multiplies that. What's left over is about 390 years. It multiplies it sevenfold. And so when you do the math on that and make the conversion for the difference between the Jewish calendar and the Gregorian calendar, what you end up with is from the time that they go into exile until 1948. It is an uber specific prophecy that's definitely worth investigating, and it's that type of prophecy is entirely unique to the Bible.
Okay, appreciated, TRock. Mark, that question was from Sunflower and was directed at you. Go ahead, final word.
Yeah, can you grab the question? I've forgotten it after that. Look, all of this prophecy stuff, there's prophecies that, are very mundane in the Bible, ones that don't get fulfilled at all, like the sacking of Tyre. This prophecy sounds like you've got to do some high-level interpretive math and carry the one, and then, it sounds like a prophecy of Notre Dame. So, well, the bird turned around 3 times, if times that by 10 and then add 5, you get this. It's creative interpretation of something in the Bible to fit with prior belief. So if you have a belief and a confirmation bias that you're going to find things in there, you will find things in there. Now, a lot of religions experienced a lot of different odds. Muslims say exactly the same thing about their religion. A lot of these religions say exactly the same thing about their religion. What we're looking for is consistency in evaluation. And, I'm really sorry, but just because a religion had a hard time and then was established and then, overcame that hard time doesn't make it true. If so, then you've got to acknowledge that Judaism is true as well. And the Cathars, who were, sort of wiped out by Christianity, were true as well. Just because it has a hard time doesn't mean anything. And just because that religion is popular now is an ad populum fallacy. Just because it gets popular doesn't mean it is the truth. Muslims, if we follow their progression, should be overtaking Christianity as the most popular religion. What then? Is Christianity then not true? You probably wouldn't say that, would you? You'd probably say, no, even if Islam overtakes it, it's still Christianity that's true. What if it declines? People are in the developed world are turning away from churches at the moment and going to independent spirituality and other religions. if less people than where's your bar for when it becomes not true, and why are we basing that upon the people following it and not hard evidence? And this is an example of really weak evidence. Yeah, sorry.
All right, you guys made it to the end. We're going to wrap it up at the 3-hour mark, and time has flown by. You guys have done a great job. The audience has been awesome, lively, entertaining, very engaged in this debate. Time really did fly by. I mean, it seems like just a second ago we were sitting backstage talking about coffee. So, Mark, TRock, thank you, gentlemen, for doing this and giving us your time, as I always like to do. Before we wrap these up, though, final words, final thoughts. So again, gents, thanks for doing it. Mark, why don't we start with you? Final thoughts, final words?
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, I laid out my methodology and what I expected as sort of credible, strong evidence, good evidence for God, not just any evidence at all. And I laid it out. I don't think that TRock, I'm sorry, mate, I don't think your evidence has stacked up to what we would consider reliable, robust, rigorous evidence, ones that take everything into consideration. And I think it's a particular failing that, my apologies, I just do think it's a failing that you've gone to, abiogenesis and planetary formation, trying to prove those wrong, trying to point out holes. Even if planetary formation is the wrongest thing we've ever done, it doesn't make a God true. You have to provide evidence for your own hypothesis. And the reason why the scientific method is so strong is because then what you would do under that is you'd go out and you would falsify that supposition that you've got. You would try to prove it wrong. But we can't apparently do that with God. And so all you've got is sort of anecdotes, stories. All you've got is the claim. And you've said, well, you really want it to be true, which in sort of doing foundational studies is a problem, because you're inherently saying, hey, I'm biased and I'll embrace that. Not only that, but you're not providing a methods in which we can verify this is true and other religions are not. Applied to the other religions, you get the same result with the conclusions that you've made. So I still remain an atheist. I don't think there is a God. I don't think a mind can exist without a brain. And if so, then show it to me. Show me this mind. But I don't think it exists, because nobody can show me and nobody can present me with good evidence. But I really want to thank TRock for talking with me. Thank you so much. Standing for Truth, give a like and subscribe to Standing for Truth if you do like religious debates and debates of that nature, because he always puts on a great show. But thank you very much for having me, and thank you for listening.
My pleasure. I appreciate those final words, and I also appreciate the recommendation there, Mark. So, TRock, let's hand it over to you. Thank you for giving us your time, 3 hours of your time for this epic debate. To the audience, please share this around. This really was a great, fantastic exchange. So, TRock, final thoughts, final words.
Yeah, thank you, Mark, for participating in the discussion. Thank you, Donnie, for hosting us and going this distance. It's got to be pretty taxing on people. Personally, I'm good with it, and a big thank you to the audience for some really good questions. Just a quick recap: the word evidence, evident. There's also a similar word that we use, inevitable. Basically means can't be avoided or can't be evaded. So evidence suggests that something is moving, and it's kind of an abstract way of thinking of things, but that's just it. That was the whole point of this discussion, was to show that logic, reason, emotion, those types of things are not natural properties of matter. Talk about neural pathways all you want. You can't have a neural pathway without some way of putting it together. And so what the God of the Bible provides is somebody outside of space, time, and matter that solves a big scientific conundrum. You can't have a singularity come from a if you want to demand that you have evidence, you can't go around supposing that there are multiverses that you can never investigate. That's the antithesis of evidence. So the strength of the biblical claim, eyewitness accounts, 100% eyewitness accounts. And that is exactly what naturalism misses. And so, yes, you can put the full picture together: archaeology, intelligence, integration of systems. No, systems do not integrate themselves naturally. They disintegrate naturally. That's why you have to do maintenance on your vehicle. That's why you have to do maintenance on everything. That's why your house falls apart when you don't take care of it. Systems do not naturally integrate. And so when you put the whole thing together, internal consistency is the philosophical logical side. The science is correct because it is consistently applied through interpolation in the biblical model, in both origins and modern technology. And finally, history. The historical reports are accurate. That's confirmable through archaeology. So I think the case is rock solid for the God of the Bible, because it's the only one that actually stacks up to all three criteria. We heard over and over how, oh, so-and-so religion says the same thing. Very generic, very non-specific. They don't say the same thing. They have specific philosophical failures, specific historic failures, and specific scientific failures, just like evolution and naturalism do. So thank you. That's it.
All right, you guys are funny. It looks like we got final words were a couple more closing statements. So I do appreciate it, though, Mark and TRock. Again, really fantastic debate. 3 hours, and it did not feel like it. So what I typically do is just give an outro and allow you guys to, get on out of here and enjoy your day and night. Well deserved. And then I am going to stick around for a couple minutes, just going over some reminders and announcements in terms of future debates. So again, Mark, TRock, thank you so much. To the audience, we'll see you in about 10 seconds. God bless all.
Thank you.
All right, guys, there we go. 3 hours later. And again, I'll say it, time flew by. This was a ton of fun. And I'd love to do more debates on this specific topic. Is there good evidence, or is there reasonable evidence for the existence of God? So both Mark and TRock made for a very, very engaging debate. So I do always appreciate when they're on the channel debating. They clearly did some prep for this, and again, made for a debate to remember. Honesty Angel, sister, yes, definitely. When we shut this down, which is very shortly, please make sure to check it out. So it looks like we had a lot of new people as well in the live chat. So Johnny says, I'm glad I found this very interesting channel. Keep it up. Appreciate it. If you're new to this channel, and you're a debate addict like myself, and probably a lot of the debaters who, come on this platform and debate, make sure to subscribe, but check the playlist titled Debates Hosted by Standing for Truth. We've now done about 190 debates on all sorts of topics, including theology, nature of God, creation versus evolution, a ton of debates on the creation versus evolution topic. Soteriology, philosophy, morality. So you've got endless content, about 190 debates to look forward to. Cheryl, sister, I appreciate that. You can check out our website, standfortruthministries.com, where you can find more there as well. Okay, so real quick, guys, and then we're just going to wrap it up. I do want to remind everybody that this summer is going to be busy. So pretty much a debate nearly every single day, with several of the days being double header nights. Okay, so I've had a ton of requests come in over the last couple months, and my goal was to make for the summer of debates. Okay, and that's what it looks like it's going to be. So we are going to be back here tomorrow for another debate, this time on the Bible translation issue. So this should be fun. Is the King James Version the only legitimate English version? CJ Cox and Nick Sayers. So they are going to be battling it out there. Nick Sayers is going to be back here as well in another month debating a gentleman named Eddie on the same topic. So that should be fun. And I've got Francis Turretin and Will Kinney, who are going to be debating the Bible controversy issue. Okay, so make sure you're there for that. Then the very next day, we've got the much anticipated debate. A lot of hype for this one. Atheist Jr., the heroic rematch, and Dr. Dino. So evolution is on trial. This one's going to be fun. As we have done the last several of these kinds of debates, Evolution Debate Challenge, it's going to be mostly discussion. So a lot of back and forth. I'll be saving questions. And so we, as always, will have a solid audience Q&A as well. And then just real quick, I'll just kind of go through a bunch of these. So we're also going to have James W. and Kent debating. We've got another big rematch, T-Jump and Kent. This one specifically actually on testable predictions. So a few debates with like kind of a hyper-specific topic. T-Jump and Kent, testable predictions. Snake was writing Kent, transitional fossils. James W. and Kent, hominid fossil records. So this is going to be fun. And of course, Mark Reid himself is going to be here. As you can see, showdown, evolution debate, Kent and Mark, with TRock also joining us again versus James W. Noah's Ark, Noah's Flood. For those that love the nature of God debates, we've got a few of those as well. Is Oneness Biblical? Matt Slick and John Barton. I've got another debate with Matt Slick and another gentleman who's been on here before. They'll probably be debating in August, once a month roughly for Matt Slick. And then Kelly Powers and Taylor Stewart. They will be debating Endgame, Kent and Wade the Wizard. So I'm going to wrap it up there, guys. This is just a snapshot of the overall debates and events that we do have set on the channel. So please, if you're not yet subscribed, hit that subscribe button, share around this content because the truth is important. And guys, critical thinking is very important. Doki Doki, appreciate all the super stickers. I appreciate all the support. You guys are the life and blood of this channel, and you guys are the reason why we are able to pump out full-time content that includes debates, interviews, discussions, conferences, and just kind of videos of all kinds. So that being said, we'll see you tomorrow night, 9 o'clock EST, for the next big debate. God bless everybody.